Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. When you're down to your last $5, giving it away seems impossible unless you're Derek Cole. This single father had been driving his beat-up Honda for 14 hours straight, picking up late-night passengers across Los Angeles just to keep the lights on for his 8-year-old son. His gas tank was nearly empty, his wallet even emptier, and tomorrow's rent was still a mystery. But when he saw a little girl sitting alone outside Murphy's diner on a cold December night, shivering in a thin jacket, Derek didn't hesitate. He walked over and handed her his last crumpled $5 bill, watching her face light up as she ran inside for something warm. What Derek didn't know was that across the street, tech billionaire Elise Remington was watching everything unfold. She'd just walked out of the worst board meeting of her career, but this stranger's simple generosity stirred something in her heart that years of corporate battles had nearly destroyed. What happens when a single father's last $5 changes both their lives forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cramped two-bedroom apartment in Koreatown, its golden rays struggling through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Derek Cole stood at the kitchen counter, methodically packing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich into a brown paper bag, the same lunch he'd been making for his 8-year-old son, Noah, every school day for the past 2 years. His movements were precise, practiced, each fold of the bag a small ritual in their carefully constructed routine. "Dad," my shoelace broke again, Noah called from the living room, his voice carrying that particular mixture of frustration and acceptance that children develop too early when money is tight. Derek set down the sandwich and walked over to where his son sat on their second-hand couch, one sneaker in his lap, the frayed lace dangling uselessly. The boy had Sarah's eyes warm brown with flecks of gold that seemed to dance when he laughed. Sometimes Derek had to look away when Noah smiled, the resemblance to his late wife so striking it felt like a gentle punch to the chest. "We'll make it work," Derek said, kneeling beside his son. He pulled a piece of duct tape from the roll they kept on the coffee table, their universal fix for everything from torn backpack straps to the loose handle on the refrigerator. With careful fingers, he reinforced the lace where it had snapped, wrapping the tape in neat spirals. "There, good as new." Noah wiggled his foot experimentally, testing the repair. "Thanks, Dad. Will we ever have enough money for new shoes?" The question hung in the air between them, honest and guileless in the way only children can be. Derek felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the weight of providing for this little person who depended on him completely. He'd been asking himself the same question every night as he lay in bed, calculating and recalculating their expenses, wondering how long he could keep all the plates spinning. "We will," Derek said, ruffling Noah's dark hair. "I promise you that. But until then, we take care of what we have, right?" "Right," Noah agreed, slipping his foot into the repaired shoe. He stood and tested it with a small hop. "It's actually pretty comfortable now." Derek smiled, watching his son's resilience in action. Noah had learned to find the silver lining in their makeshift solutions, a trait that both broke Derek's heart and filled him with fierce pride. The boy understood their situation without ever making Derek feel like he was failing, though the guilt gnawed at him constantly anyway. "Breakfast is ready," Derek announced, returning to the kitchen where 2 bowls of generic cornflakes waited on their small table. He'd watered down the milk slightly to make it last until Friday, but Noah never complained. They sat together in comfortable silence, the morning news playing softly on their ancient televisiona luxury. Derek couldn't quite bring himself to cancel despite the monthly expense. The apartment around them told the story of their life together in quiet details. Family photos from happier times clustered on the mantel, many featuring Sarah's radiant smile and the 3 of them at beaches, parks, and birthday parties from what felt like another lifetime. Her medical bills still arrived occasionally, forwarded from their old address, each envelope a reminder of the 2 years they'd spent fighting a battle they couldn't win. "Mrs. Chen wants to know if you need help with the groceries again," Noah said between spoonfuls of cereal, referring to their elderly Korean neighbor who had become something of a grandmother figure to him. "Tell Mrs. Chen we're doing fine," Derek replied automatically, the same response he gave to anyone who offered help. Pride was perhaps his greatest weakness and his most necessary armor. He'd grown up poor, worked his way through community college while supporting his mother, and met Sarah when they were both young and optimistic about the future. Her illness had wiped out their savings, their dreams, and eventually Sarah herself, but it hadn't broken his determination to provide for Noah on his own terms. After breakfast, Derek gathered his things for another long day. His Uber driving supplies filled a worn canvas bag, phone charger, breath mints, wet wipes, a thermos of coffee that would have to last until evening. His warehouse job started at noon, giving him a few hours to catch the morning rush of airport rides and business commuters. Between the two jobs, he might clear $300 on a good day, enough to keep them afloat with little left over. "I'll pick you up from Mrs. Chen's at 6. He told Noah, who would spend the after-school hours with their neighbor rather than alone in the apartment. "We'll work on your math homework together." "Can we make pancakes for dinner?" Noah asked hopefully. It was his favorite meal, partly because Derek had perfected a recipe using boxed mix and creativity that made even their humble kitchen feel festive. "If you finish all your homework first," Derek agreed, watching Noah's face light up with genuine excitement over something so simple. These were the moments that reminded him why he pushed through the exhaustion, the worry, the constant pressure of making ends meet. Noah's happiness was worth every sacrifice. The walk to Noah's school took them through the heart of Koreatown, past bustling markets and restaurants that filled the air with complex, wonderful smells Derek couldn't afford to enjoy. Noah chatted about his upcoming science project, something involving growing beans in different types of soil, and Derek listened with the focused attention he'd learned to give these conversations. Too often, work consumed his thoughts even when he was physically present, but he fought against that tendency every day. "Mr. Martinez says I'm really good at explaining things to the other kids," Noah said proudly as they approached the school's chain-link fence. "He thinks I might be a teacher someday." "You'd be a great teacher," Derek said, meaning it completely. Noah had inherited Sarah's natural warmth and Derek's patience, qualities that would serve him well in any profession that involved helping others. "You can be anything you want to be, buddy. Don't let anyone tell you different." They paused at the school entrance, other parents and children streaming past them with their own morning routines and private conversations. Derek noticed the small details that reminded him of their circumstances. Noah's backpack was clean but clearly second-hand, his clothes well-maintained but not quite the latest styles, his lunch packed in a reused grocery bag rather than an insulated lunchbox. "Have a good day," Derek said, giving Noah a quick hug that the boy accepted without the self-consciousness that might come from other 8-year-olds. "Learn something new." "I always do," Noah replied with a grin, then jogged toward the building where his teacher waited by the doors. Derek watched until Noah disappeared inside, a ritual that had become sacred to him. Those few seconds of seeing his son safe and happy at school gave him the energy to face whatever challenges the day might bring. He pulled out his phone and opened the Uber app, waiting for the familiar notification sound that would direct him to his first passenger. The morning rush was predictable but not particularly profitable. 3 short rides downtown, 2 trips to LAX that barely covered the gas money, and a handful of customers who treated him like part of the car's upholstery rather than a human being providing a service. By 11:30, he'd made $63, enough to buy Noah the new colored pencils he needed for art class and put a few dollars toward their electric bill. The warehouse job was Derek's anchor, providing the closest thing to steady income he could manage without a college degree or specialized training. The work was physical loading and unloading trucks, organizing inventory, occasionally driving deliveries around the city, but it offered consistent hours and a paycheck he could count on. His co-workers were good people, mostly men in similar situations who understood the weight of supporting families on wages that never quite stretched far enough. "You look tired, man," said Carlos, a fellow driver who had become Derek's closest friend at the warehouse. They worked side by side, stacking boxes with practiced efficiency while Latino music played from a small radio nearby. "Long night," Derek admitted. "Didn't get home until almost 3. "This pace is going to kill you," Carlos observed, not for the first time. "You need to find something that pays better, or at least something that doesn't require you to work every waking hour." Derek had heard this advice before, from Carlos and others who cared about him. The logic was sound, but the reality was more complicated. Better-paying jobs required qualifications he didn't have, time he couldn't spare, or connections he hadn't made. The Uber driving supplemented his warehouse income in ways that traditional part-time work could drive. When Noah was asleep or at school, accept rides that fit his schedule, and stop working if Noah got sick or needed him. "I'm managing," Derek said, lifting another box onto the growing stack. "Noah's happy, we have a roof over our heads, and we're not taking charity from anyone." "That's more than a lot of people can say." Carlos nodded, understanding the pride behind Derek's determination, even if he worried about his friend's well-being. They'd had similar conversations before, usually ending with Carlos offering help that Derek politely declined. It wasn't that Derek didn't appreciate the gesture, he was deeply grateful for the friendship and support, but accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that he couldn't provide for his son alone. The afternoon passed in a blur of physical labor and quiet conversation. Derek's body moved automatically through familiar tasks, while his mind wandered to evening plans with Noah, weekend errands, and the ever-present calculations of their budget. Rent was due in 10 days, Noah needed new shoes soon, and the car was making a noise that probably indicated an expensive repair in their near future. At 5:30, Derek clocked out and drove directly to Mrs. Chen's apartment, where Noah would be finishing his homework at her kitchen table while she prepared dinner for herself and her elderly husband. Mrs. Chen had taken an interest in Noah shortly after they moved to the building, perhaps recognizing in him the grandson she'd never had. She never charged Derek for watching Noah, despite his offers to pay, and often sent them home with small containers of Korean food that stretched their grocery budget in ways she pretended not to notice. "Papa Derek," Noah called out as soon as Derek knocked on the door, using the formal address Mrs. Chen had taught him as a sign of respect. "Hello, Derek," Mrs. Chen said warmly, opening the door wide to welcome him inside. Her apartment was exactly like theirs in layout, but felt completely different, filled with family photos, decorative plants, and the lingering aromas of home cooking. Noah finished his math homework and helped me water the plants on the balcony. "Thank you so much," Derek said, meaning it deeply. Mrs. Chen's kindness was one of the bright spots in their challenging circumstances, a reminder that good people existed in the world and sometimes appeared exactly when you needed them most. Noah gathered his backpack and said his polite goodbyes, then walked hand in hand with Derek back to their own apartment. The building's hallways were narrow and poorly lit, the carpet worn thin from decades of foot traffic, but Noah skipped slightly as they walked, his energy restored by an afternoon of attention and care. "Mrs. Chen taught me how to fold paper cranes," Noah announced proudly. "She says if you make 1,000 of them, you get to make a wish that comes true." "What would you wish for?" Derek asked, genuinely curious about his son's priorities. Noah considered this seriously as they climbed the stairs to their floor. "I think I'd wish for you not to have to work so much," he said finally, "so we could play more games and maybe go to the beach like we used to with Mom." The simple honesty of it stopped Derek in his tracks for a moment. He'd been so focused on providing the basics: food, shelter, stability, that he'd forgotten Noah might be longing for the intangible things that made life rich rather than merely survivable. Time together, adventures, the luxury of relaxation that Derek couldn't remember experiencing since Sarah's diagnosis. "That sounds like a pretty good wish," Derek said softly, unlocking their apartment door. "Maybe we should both start making paper cranes." As they settled into their evening routine, Derek felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and gratitude that defined most of his days. Noah spread his homework across their small table while Derek started preparing pancake batter, the apartment filling with comfortable sounds of domesticity. The television provided background noise, and the setting sun painted their walls with warm golden light that made even their modest surroundings feel cozy. This was their life, simple, challenging, but built on a foundation of love that Derek refused to let circumstances erode. Tomorrow would bring another long day of driving and lifting, another collection of small worries and careful budgeting. But tonight, they would eat pancakes and work on multiplication tables and maybe watch a movie before bedtime. Derek looked at Noah's bent head as the boy concentrated on his homework, pencil moving carefully across the page, and felt the fierce protectiveness that had driven every decision since Sarah's death. Whatever it took, however many hours he had to work, he would make sure Noah had every opportunity to become the remarkable person he was already showing signs of being. That promise, made silently over pancake batter and homework, was worth more than any amount of money or comfort Derek might sacrifice along the way. Elise Remington sat in her Tesla outside the gleaming Remtech Solutions building, staring at the darkened windows of the conference room where her evening had imploded. The board meeting had been a disaster. 3 hours of accusations, disappointed investors, and pointed questions about her company's declining community engagement scores. Her latest quarterly report showed impressive profit margins but abysmal public perception, a combination that made shareholders nervous in an era when corporate social responsibility drove stock prices as much as actual revenue. "We're losing touch with real people," board member Patricia Westfield had said, her voice cutting through the polished conference room like a blade. "Your community outreach programs feel manufactured, scripted. People can smell inauthentic corporate charity from a mile away, Elise. We need genuine connection, not photo opportunities." The criticism stung because it was accurate. Somewhere between building Remtech from a startup into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, Elise had lost the idealistic vision that originally drove her. The company's community programs existed on spreadsheets and in press releases, managed by teams who treated social responsibility like a marketing campaign rather than a genuine mission. Now, at nearly midnight, she sat alone in her car, contemplating the gulf between her corporate success and her personal emptiness. The building around her represented everything she'd worked: 4 sleek offices, cutting-edge technology, a workforce of brilliant minds solving complex problems, but tonight it felt hollow, like a beautifully designed shell with nothing meaningful inside. Her phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband, Richard. "Emma's asking when you're picking her up tomorrow. She misses you." The message carried its usual undertone of gentle reproach, a reminder that their 8-year-old daughter spent more time with her father than with Elise, despite the joint custody arrangement they'd carefully negotiated through lawyers. Elise started the car and drove aimlessly through the empty Los Angeles streets, her mind replaying the evening's conversations. She'd built Remtech to solve problems, to make technology more accessible and meaningful for ordinary people. When had that mission become secondary to profit margins and investor presentations? When had she stopped thinking about the humans her company was supposed to serve? The question followed her through downtown, past the late-night food trucks and clusters of people whose lives looked nothing like her carefully scheduled existence. She pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour establishment she'd noticed during other sleepless drives but never entered. The building was weathered and unpretentious, its neon sign flickering slightly in the December night air. As she sat in her car, gathering the energy to go inside for coffee, Elise noticed a small figure huddled on the concrete steps near the diner's entrance. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a thin jacket that provided inadequate protection against the cold. The child sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, looking lost and hungry, in a way that immediately triggered every maternal instinct Elise possessed. Before she could process the situation fully, a beat-up Honda Civic pulled into the lot and parked near her Tesla. The driver was a man in his 30s, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and the kind of exhausted expression Elise recognized from her own mirror after particularly grueling days. He climbed out of his car, slowly, like someone whose body ached from too many hours of physical work. The man noticed the little girl immediately. Instead of walking past her into the diner, he approached the child with gentle concern. Elise watched from her car as he knelt down to the girl's level, his body language conveying kindness and genuine care. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw him reach into his wallet and pull out what appeared to be his last few bills. Without hesitation, he handed the money to the child and watched as her face transformed with gratitude and relief. The girl jumped up and ran into the diner, presumably to buy food, while the man remained outside for a moment, smiling at her obvious happiness despite his own apparent exhaustion and financial strain. The simple interaction lasted less than 2 minutes, but it struck Elise with unexpected force. Here was a stranger giving away what might have been his last $5 to help a child he'd never met, expecting nothing in return except the satisfaction of easing another person's suffering. The gesture was so natural, so immediate, that it clearly came from instinct rather than calculation. Elise felt something crack open inside her chest, recognition of the authentic human connection she'd been discussing in abstract terms all evening. This wasn't a corporate charity event or a tax-deductible donation designed to generate positive publicity. This was simply one person helping another because it was the right thing to do, regardless of personal cost. The man walked into the diner, and Elise found herself following him inside, drawn by curiosity and something deeper she couldn't quite name. The interior was exactly what she'd expected: worn, vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting, and the lingering smell of coffee and fried food. The man sat at the counter and ordered coffee, black, counting coins to pay for it, while the little girl sat in a corner booth, devouring a sandwich and soup. Elise took a booth across the room, observing this stranger who had just demonstrated the kind of genuine compassion her company was desperately trying to manufacture. He looked tired but content, occasionally glancing over at the child to make sure she was eating well. When the girl waved at him, he waved back with a smile that transformed his entire face. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and practical shoes, refilled his coffee cup without being asked. "That was a nice thing you did," she said quietly, nodding toward the little girl. "She looked hungry," the man replied simply, as if his response had been inevitable rather than generous. "Not everyone would have noticed," the waitress observed, "and fewer still would have done anything about it." The man shrugged, uncomfortable with praise for what he clearly considered basic human decency. Elise studied his profile, noting the laugh lines around his eyes, the careful way he made his coffee last, the gentle patience in his posture. Everything about him suggested someone who understood struggle intimately, but hadn't let it make him bitter or self-absorbed. When the little girl finished eating, she approached the man's stool shyly. "Thank you, mister," she said in a small voice. "My mom's coming to get me soon, but I was really hungry." "I'm glad you got something good to eat," he replied warmly. "Make sure you stay where it's warm until she gets here, okay?" The child nodded and returned to her booth, where she curled up to wait with the satisfied exhaustion of someone whose immediate needs had been met. The man finished his coffee, left a modest tip that probably strained his budget, and headed toward the door. Elise made a quick decision that would alter both their lives. She followed him outside, her heart racing with an impulsiveness that felt foreign after years of calculated business decisions. The man was already in his car, but she tapped on the driver's side window before he could pull away. He rolled down the window with obvious wariness, probably wondering what this well-dressed woman in expensive clothes could possibly want from him at midnight outside a downtown diner. "I'm sorry to bother you," Elise began, realizing she had no clear plan for this conversation. "I saw what you did for that little girl. It was incredibly kind." The man looked uncomfortable, glancing toward the diner as if he wanted to make sure the child was still safe inside. "It wasn't a big deal," he said quietly. "It was to her," Elise replied, "and it was to me, watching it happen. I'm Elise Remington. I run a tech company here in the city. We're always looking for people who understand community, who can connect with others authentically. Would you be interested in hearing about a position? She pulled a business card from her purse, one of the sleek, minimalist cards that represented her corporate identity, but suddenly felt inadequate to bridge the gap between their worlds. The man took it slowly, reading her name and title with obvious confusion. "I drive for Uber," he said finally. "I don't know anything about technology or corporate work." "You know about people," Elise replied. "You saw someone who needed help and you helped them without thinking about what you might get in return. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need." The Mandarik, according to the name on his Uber profile, she'd glimpsed through his windshield, studied her business card, like it might contain answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. His hesitation was obvious, and Elise realized she was asking him to consider something completely outside his experience. "I have a son," he said slowly. "I can't take risks with unstable income." "This would be stable," Elise assured him. "Full-time position, benefits, opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. Community outreach coordinator helping us connect with the neighborhoods and families we serve." Derek was quiet for a long moment, and Elise could see him weighing possibilities against responsibilities, hope against the safety of familiar struggle. When he finally looked up at her, his expression was carefully neutral but not dismissive. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course," Elise replied, though every instinct told her to press the advantage, to close this deal before he could reconsider. "My number's on the card. Call me tomorrow if you're interested, and we can talk more." Derek nodded and carefully tucked the business card into his shirt pocket. "Thank you for the offer. I appreciate it, even if I'm not sure I'm the right person for what you need." "I think you might be exactly the right person," Elise said softly, stepping back as he started his car. She watched him drive away, then returned to her own Tesla with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. The evening that had begun with corporate disappointment and personal emptiness had transformed into something else entirely, the possibility she couldn't yet define, but was eager to explore. Back in her car, Elise found herself thinking about the contrast between Derek's instinctive generosity and her own carefully calculated charitable initiatives. He had given away his last $5 to help a stranger's child, while she donated millions to causes that generated positive press coverage but rarely touched her personally. The difference wasn't just in scale, but in authenticity, in the genuine human connection that her company desperately needed to rediscover. For the first time in months, Elise felt genuinely excited about going to work the next day, not because of profit projections or investor meetings, but because she might have found someone who could help her remember why she'd started Remtech in the first place, to make technology serve humanity rather than the other way around. As she drove home through the empty streets, Elise realized that the stranger's simple act of kindness had given her something more valuable than any business strategy or marketing campaign. It had shown her a way back to the authentic connection she'd lost, somewhere between the startup dream and corporate success. A path toward rediscovering the person she'd been before ambition and achievement became more important than the people she was supposed to serve. Derek stared at the gleaming Remtech Solutions building from the parking garage, his reflection multiplied in the mirrored glass surfaces that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. The business card in his pocket felt heavier than its physical weight suggested, a small rectangle of possibility that had kept him awake most of the night. He'd called Elise Remington that morning, his voice uncertain as he accepted her job offer, and now he stood here wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. The lobby was all polished marble and modern art, the kind of space designed to intimidate visitors and remind them of the company's success. Derek's scuffed work boots echoed against the floor as he approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit looked up at him with professional curiosity. "I'm Derek Cole," he said, holding up the temporary badge Elise had arranged for him. "It's my first day." "Of course, Mr. Cole," the receptionist replied, with a bright smile that seemed genuine rather than corporate. "Ms. Remington is waiting for you on the 15th floor. The elevators are just past the security desk." The elevator ride gave Derek a moment to collect himself, but the view from the 15th floor windows only intensified his sense of displacement. Los Angeles spread out below him like a circuit board, all organized patterns and flowing traffic, while he felt like a component that didn't quite fit the design. Elise appeared in the elevator doorway as the doors opened, wearing a tailored blazer and an expression of warm professionalism that immediately put Derek at ease. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting of Murphy's diner, she'd looked like any other late-night patron, but here in her natural environment, her authority and success were unmistakable. "Derek," she said, extending her hand with a smile that reached her eyes. "I'm so glad you decided to join us. Ready for the grand tour?" The next hour passed in a blur of introductions, office spaces, and explanations of company culture that Derek tried to absorb while fighting his growing imposter syndrome. Remtech Solutions occupied 3 floors of the building, with departments devoted to software development, marketing, customer service, and community outreach, the division where Derek would supposedly fit despite having no clear qualifications for corporate work. "This is Marcus Chen, our operations manager," Elise said, introducing Derek to a sharp, dressed man in his 40s whose handshake was firm but whose smile seemed forced. "He'll be working closely with you on logistics and program implementation." Marcus looked Derek up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "So you're the community outreach specialist," he said, his tone suggesting he found the title questionable. "What's your background in corporate social responsibility?" "I don't have one," Derek replied honestly, deciding that pretense would only make things worse. "I drive for Uber and work at a warehouse, but I know what it's like to need help, and I know what it feels like when someone actually cares enough to provide it." The answer seemed to surprise Marcus, who had clearly expected either false credentials or defensive justification. "Well," he said after a moment, "I suppose that's more authentic than most of our consultants. We'll see how it translates to actual program development." Elise moved them quickly past the awkward moment, but Derek could feel Marcus's doubt following them through the office. Other employees looked up from their computer screens with polite curiosity as they passed, their expressions ranging from welcoming to skeptical. Derek recognized the look he'd seen it before, when people learned he was a single father, when teachers discovered his educational background, when landlords heard about his employment situation. It was the expression of people wondering if he belonged in their world. "This will be your office," Elise said, opening the door to a small but well-appointed space with a window view of the city. "Linda Martinez from HR will help you get set up with computer access, benefits, enrollment, all the practical details. But first, I wanted to talk with you about what we're hoping to accomplish." Derek sat across from Elise's desk in her corner office, surrounded by awards, photographs, and the visible symbols of her professional success. The contrast with his cramped apartment felt surreal, like he'd accidentally wandered into someone else's life and was now expected to play a role he didn't understand. "Our community outreach programs have been struggling," Elise admitted, her corporate mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine concern. "We donate money, sponsor events, partner with local organizations, but the feedback consistently tells us we're missing something essential. People see our efforts as publicity stunts rather than genuine engagement." "Maybe because they are publicity stunts," Derek suggested gently, then immediately worried he'd overstepped some unspoken boundary. Elise laughed, a sound of relief rather than offense. "Exactly. That's what I'm hoping you can help us change. We need someone who understands what real help looks like, who can spot the difference between marketing and meaningful support." She pulled out a thick folder filled with reports, surveys, and program evaluations, the corporate documentation of their failed attempts to connect authentically with the communities they claimed to serve. Derek flipped through pages of statistics and focus group feedback, recognizing in the clinical language the same frustration he'd felt countless times when well-meaning organizations offered assistance that missed the mark entirely. "This program here," he said, pointing to a description of their school supply donation initiative. "You're giving kids backpacks and notebooks, which is nice, But what about the families who can't afford to wash the kids' clothes regularly? What about the parents who need help understanding homework assignments because English isn't their first language? You're solving the visible problem, but you're not addressing the invisible struggles that make the visible ones worse. Elise leaned forward, her attention focused with an intensity that made Derek slightly uncomfortable. Tell me more about that. What would genuine help look like? Derek thought about Mrs. Chen, about the small kindnesses that had made the biggest difference in his and Noah's lives. It's about seeing people as individuals rather than categories, he said slowly. It's about asking what they actually need, instead of assuming you know. It's about building relationships, instead of just providing services. Can you give me a specific example? There's this kid in Noah's class, whose family speaks mostly Spanish at home, Derek said, warming to the subject despite his nervousness. His mom wants to help with homework, but she can't read the assignments. So instead of just giving him school supplies, maybe we could provide English tutoring for parents, or homework sessions where bilingual volunteers can help bridge the communication gap. You're not just solving today's problem, you're helping the family build capacity to solve tomorrow's problems too. Elise was taking notes on a legal pad, her pen moving rapidly as Derek talked. This is exactly what we've been missing, she said. The human perspective, the understanding of how problems really work in people's lives, rather than how they look in research reports. The conversation continued for another hour, Derek gradually relaxing as he realized his life experience was actually valuable in this context. Elise asked thoughtful questions about community dynamics, about the difference between charity and empowerment, about how to build trust with people who had good reasons to be skeptical of corporate intentions. When Linda Martinez arrived to handle the practical aspects of his employment, Derek felt a tentative optimism beginning to replace his initial anxiety. The HR director was warm and efficient, explaining benefits packages and computer systems with the patience of someone who understood he was navigating unfamiliar territory. You'll start at $60,000 a year, Linda explained, handing him forms to sign. Health insurance kicks in after 30 days, and we have a decent retirement matching program if you're interested. Derek nodded, trying to process numbers that represented more financial security than he'd experienced since Sarah's diagnosis. $60,000 more than he'd made from both jobs combined in his best year, with benefits that would eliminate his constant worry about medical expenses for Noah. Is there anything else you need to know about the company culture or policies? Linda asked. I have a son, Derek said, the words coming out more abruptly than he'd intended. He's 8, and sometimes I need to leave work if he's sick or if there's a school emergency. I know this is a professional environment, but he has to come first. Linda smiled, her expression understanding rather than concerned. Elise made it clear that life balance is important to her, especially for parents. We're flexible about hours as long as the work gets done and you communicate with your team. Family comes first. That's actually part of our official company values, though I know not everyone lives up to it. By the end of his first day, Derek had his computer set up, his temporary badge replaced with a permanent one, and a basic understanding of Remtech's current community programs. The learning curve was steep: corporate email systems, project management software, budget spreadsheets, but his co-workers seemed genuinely willing to help him navigate the technical aspects of the job. Marcus remained skeptical but professional, assigning Derek to review their existing community partnerships and identify areas for improvement. Start with observation, he suggested during their end-of-day meeting. Get familiar with what we're already doing before you recommend changes. And remember, any new initiatives need to be scalable and measurable. We can't just throw money at problems and hope for the best. Derek nodded, understanding that Marcus's caution came from experience with well-intentioned programs that had failed to deliver meaningful results. The challenge would be finding ways to maintain the personal touch that made help effective while working within the systems and structures that made corporate engagement possible. That evening, as Derek picked up Noah from Mrs. Chen's apartment, he felt lighter than he had in months. The steady income, the health insurance, the possibility of building something meaningful, it All felt almost too good to be true. "How was your first day at the new job?" Noah asked as they walked home together. "Different," Derek replied honestly. "But good different, I think. It's going to take some getting used to, but the people seem nice, and they want me to help families like ours. Will you still have time to help me with homework?" "Always," Derek promised, ruffling his son's hair. "That's never going to change, no matter what kind of work I'm doing." As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, Derek felt the weight of possibility settling around him like a comfortable jacket. The business card in his pocket had opened a door he'd never imagined walking through, and tomorrow he would begin the work of proving that authentic human connection could coexist with corporate efficiency. The badge clipped to his shirt pocket, Derek Cole, Community Outreach Coordinator, felt like both an identity and a challenge. A reminder that sometimes the most important qualifications couldn't be found on a resume, but had to be earned through the simple act of caring about other people's struggles as much as your own. 3 weeks into his new position, Derek had found his rhythm at Remtech Solutions. His desk was covered with handwritten notes, community contact information, and printed emails from local organizations, a deliberately analog approach that his colleagues found either charming or inefficient, depending on their perspective. The computer skills were coming slowly, but his ability to connect with people had already begun to transform their community outreach efforts. "Derek, you need to see this," Linda Martinez said, appearing at his office door with a manila folder and an expression of genuine excitement. "We just received this in the mail." She handed him a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, the kind a child might tear from a school composition book. The writing was careful and deliberate, with the measured formation of letters that suggested someone for whom English was a second language. "Dear Remtech people," the letter began. "My name is Maria Santos, and I want to thank you for sending Derek to help with my daughter's school project. She was scared about the science fair because we don't understand the instructions very good, but Derek came to our house and showed us how to make the volcano. He was very patient and kind, and he didn't make us feel stupid for not knowing. My daughter won 3rd place, and now she wants to be a scientist. Thank you for caring about families like us. We will never forget your kindness." Derek felt his throat tighten as he read the letter. Maria Santos was one of the first families he'd visited as part of his community assessment. A single mother working 2 jobs, whose daughter struggled with science homework that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all the sense it made to her parents. Derek had spent an evening at their kitchen table, helping them understand the assignment while learning about their daily challenges and dreams. "There's more," Linda said, producing additional letters from the folder. "This came from the community center director, this one from a teacher at Roosevelt Elementary, and this one from a family whose electricity got shut off. They said, you helped them navigate the utility assistance program and got their power restored in 2 days instead of 2 weeks. Derek spread the letters across his desk, each one representing a connection he'd made while trying to understand how Remtech's resources could address real problems rather than perceived ones. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly, it was specific and personal. These weren't form letters generated by a corporate communications department. They were authentic expressions of gratitude from people whose lives had been tangibly improved. "Marcus wants to see you," Linda continued, her smile suggesting this was good news rather than the summons Derek initially feared. "I think he's finally starting to understand what you bring to the team." Derek found Marcus in the conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets, program evaluations, and a laptop displaying charts that tracked their community engagement metrics. The operations manager looked up as Derek entered, his expression more thoughtful than skeptical for the first time since they'd met. "Sit down," Marcus said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I owe you an apology. When Elise hired you, I thought she was making an emotional decision based on one moment of good publicity. I was wrong." He turned his laptop screen toward Derek, revealing a dashboard of statistics that tracked everything from program participation rates to community satisfaction scores. "Look at these numbers," Marcus continued. "In 3 weeks, you've increased our community engagement by 40%. More importantly, our feedback ratings have gone from mediocre to outstanding. Derek studied the charts, recognizing the data behind his daily work, but seeing it quantified in corporate terms for the first time. "I'm just doing what makes sense," he said. "Talking to people, listening to what they actually need, following up to make sure our help is actually helpful." "That's exactly what we've been missing," Marcus admitted. "We were so focused on efficiency and scalability that we forgot the human element. You've shown us that authentic engagement doesn't have to be incompatible with business objectives. In fact, it's the only way to achieve sustainable results." Marcus pulled out a printed proposal, several pages thick with budget projections and implementation timelines. "I want to expand your program," he said. "Hire 2 additional community liaisons to work under your supervision, increase our outreach budget by 30%, and formalize the relationship-based approach you've been developing informally." Derek flipped through the proposal, seeing his intuitive methods translated into corporate structure without losing their essential humanity. The plan called for neighborhood coordinators who would build ongoing relationships with families, schools, and community organizations, rather than simply delivering one-time services. "What would this mean for my role?" Derek asked, both excited and nervous about the implications of success. "It means you'd become a department head," Marcus replied. "Community engagement director, with real authority to shape how we interact with the neighborhoods we serve. It also means more responsibility, more visibility within the company, and significantly more impact on people's lives." That afternoon, Derek found himself in Elise's office again, but this time the dynamic felt different. Instead of the tentative job candidate trying to prove his worth, he was a valued employee being asked to expand his influence within the organization. "I've been watching your work," Elise said, settling into the chair beside his rather than remaining behind her desk. "Not just the metrics, though they're impressive, but the way you've changed the atmosphere here. People are talking differently about our community programs, approaching the work with more genuine enthusiasm. I think they just needed permission to care." Derek replied. "Everyone here is smart and well-intentioned, but corporate culture sometimes makes it feel risky to be emotionally invested in the outcomes." Elise nodded, recognizing the truth in his observation. "That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. How do we maintain the efficiency and professionalism that makes us successful while preserving the human connections that make our work meaningful?" Before Derek could answer, there was a soft knock on the office door. Elise's assistant appeared with a young girl in tow, perhaps 8 years old, with dark hair and curious eyes that took in the office surroundings with obvious interest. "Emma," Elise said, her professional demeanor immediately softening into maternal warmth. "I thought you were staying with your father today." "He had to work late," the girl replied, approaching her mother's desk with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had spent time in this environment before. "Mrs. Patterson said I could wait here until he picks me up." Derek watched the interaction with recognition, the careful balance of professional responsibilities and parental duties that he navigated every day with Noah. Emma noticed him sitting nearby and offered a shy smile that immediately reminded him of his own son's polite interactions with adults. "Emma, this is Derek," Elise said. "He's the one who's been helping families in the community with their children's school projects and other challenges." "Like homework help?" Emma asked with obvious interest. "Sometimes," Derek replied, instinctively modulating his voice to the patient tone he used with Noah and his friends. "What kind of subjects do you need help with?" "Math is really hard," Emma admitted, glancing at her mother as if confessing a weakness. "And my dad tries to help, but he gets frustrated when I don't understand things right away." Derek felt a familiar pang of recognition, the challenge of single parenthood, the difficulty of maintaining patience when exhaustion and worry competed with love and good intentions. "Math can be tricky," he agreed, "but usually there's just one little piece that isn't clicking, and once you figure that out, everything else starts to make sense." Emma's face brightened with hope. "Really? Could you show me sometime?" "Emma," Elise said gently, Derek has his own son to help with homework, and he's very busy with his work here. It's okay, Derek said, surprising himself with the offer. If you want to bring your math homework by my office sometime, I'd be happy to take a look. Noah, that's my Sony's about your age, so I'm pretty familiar with third-grade math problems. The simple exchange seemed to affect Elise more than Derek had intended. He noticed her watching the interaction with an expression of something like gratitude mixed with vulnerability, as if she were seeing possibilities she hadn't considered before. After Emma settled into a corner of the office with her backpack and a coloring book, Elise returned to their conversation about expanding Derek's role. But the dynamics had shifted subtly. They weren't just discussing corporate strategy anymore, but exploring how authentic human connections could be woven into professional relationships without compromising either. I want you to know, Elise said as their meeting concluded, that hiring you has reminded me why I started this company in the first place. It's easy to lose sight of the human element when you're focused on growth and efficiency, but you've shown us that the most effective programs are also the most genuinely caring ones. Derek gathered his papers and prepared to return to his office, where a stack of community partnership proposals waited for his review. The handwritten thank you letters were pinned to his bulletin board, visible reminders that his work had meaning beyond corporate metrics and performance evaluations. As he walked through the office, Derek noticed the subtle changes that had occurred since his arrival. Conversations at the coffee station included more discussion of individual families they were helping, rather than abstract program statistics. The community outreach team had started sharing stories of successful interventions alongside their monthly reports. The atmosphere felt more connected, more purposeful, as if the organization was rediscovering its soul. That evening, as Derek helped Noah with his own math homework at their kitchen table, he reflected on how much their lives had changed in just 3 weeks. The financial security was transformative. They'd been able to buy Noah new shoes, stock their refrigerator properly, and even start a small savings account for emergencies. But more importantly, Derek felt like he was building something meaningful, using his life experiences to create genuine positive change for other families facing similar challenges. "Dad," Noah said, looking up from his multiplication problems, "are you happier now?" The question was direct and insightful in the way that children's observations often were. Derek considered his answer carefully, wanting to be honest without diminishing the love and contentment they'd found together even during their most difficult times. "I'm different kinds of happy," he said finally. "I was always happy to be your dad, even when things were hard. But now I'm also happy about the work I get to do, about being able to help other families the way people have helped us." Noah nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Like Mrs. Chen helps us, and now you help other people." "Exactly like that." Derek agreed, feeling the warm satisfaction of seeing his son understand the interconnected nature of community support. It's like a big circle of people taking care of each other. As they finished homework and prepared for their evening routine, Derek felt the deep contentment that came from alignment when personal values, professional responsibilities, and family needs all pointed in the same direction. The handwritten thank you letter from Maria Santos was folded in his wallet, a tangible reminder that sometimes the most profound changes began with the simplest acts of genuine care. Derek stood at his bathroom mirror on a Saturday morning, studying his reflection with an unfamiliar sense of discomfort. 6 weeks at Remtech had brought changes he hadn't anticipated: better clothes, a more confident posture, the subtle markers of professional success, but also an internal complexity that left him feeling unsettled. Around his neck, Sarah's wedding ring hung on a thin gold chain, a constant reminder of promises made and a love that death had interrupted but not ended. The ring had been his talisman through the darkest period of his life, a physical connection to the woman who had believed in his capacity for goodness, even when he struggled to see it himself. He'd worn it every day since her funeral, a declaration that his heart remained committed to her memory, despite the practical demands of single parenthood and survival. But lately, especially after spending time with Elise and Emma, Derek found himself questioning what loyalty to Sarah's memory actually required. Would she want him to remain frozen in grief, or would she encourage him to embrace the possibility of love again? The uncertainty troubled him more than he cared to admit, creating an emotional dissonance that followed him through his daily routines. "Dad, are we still going to the company picnic today?" Noah called from the kitchen, his voice carrying the excitement of a child anticipating an adventure beyond their usual routine. Derek tucked the ring beneath his shirt and joined his son for breakfast, noting how Noah had carefully laid out his best clothes for the occasion. The company picnic represented more than just a work event. It was Noah's first real glimpse into his father's new professional world, and Derek felt the familiar pressure of wanting everything to go perfectly. "Absolutely," Derek replied, pouring orange juice into Noah's favorite cup. "Elise said there would be games, food trucks, and maybe even a bounce house. Does that sound fun?" "Will Emma be there?" Noah asked, with studied casualness that didn't fool Derek for a moment. Over the past few weeks, Noah had developed a friendship with Elise's daughter that brought both children obvious joy while creating increasingly complex emotional territory for their parents to navigate. "I think so," Derek said, watching Noah's face light up with anticipation. "But remember, this is still a work event for me. We need to be on our best behavior." The picnic was being held at Griffith Park, and when they arrived, Derek was struck by how different his Remtech colleagues looked outside the corporate environment. Marcus was manning a barbecue grill with the focused intensity he usually reserved for quarterly reports, while Linda chased her young grandson around the playground with obvious delight. The artificial barriers of office hierarchy seemed to dissolve in the sunshine and casual atmosphere. "Derek," Elise appeared beside them, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her in jeans and a simple white blouse. Emma hung shyly behind her mother's legs until she spotted Noah, then broke into a smile that transformed her entire demeanor. "Can we go play on the swings?" Emma asked, already reaching for Noah's hand, with the unconscious familiarity that had developed between them. "Stay where we can see you," Derek and Elise said simultaneously, then laughed at their unintentional synchronization. The moment created an intimate bubble around them, a recognition of shared parental instincts that felt both natural and charged with possibility. "They're good for each other," Elise observed, as they watched their children race toward the playground equipment. "Emma's been more confident lately, more willing to try new things. I think Noah's kindness helps her feel braver." Derek nodded, understanding the observation on multiple levels. "Noah's been happier too. Having Emma as a friend has given him something to look forward to, beyond just our routine at home." They found themselves walking together toward the food trucks, their conversation flowing easily between professional updates and personal observations. Other Remtech employees greeted Derek warmly, several mentioning specific families he'd helped or programs he'd initiated. The recognition felt good, but Derek found himself most focused on how comfortable he felt beside Elise, how naturally their steps matched and their conversation meandered through topics both significant and mundane. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," Elise said as they waited in line for barbecue sandwiches. "About the difference between charity and empowerment. I realize I've spent most of my career confusing the two." "They're not mutually exclusive," Derek replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes people need immediate help to stabilize their situation before they can focus on longer-term improvements. The key is making sure the help builds capacity rather than creating dependence." Elise turned to face him fully, her expression intent with the kind of focus she usually reserved for important business discussions. "You've changed how I think about success," she said quietly. "Not just professionally, but personally. Watching you with Noah, seeing how you balance work and parenthood, it's made me realize how much I've been missing with Emma." The admission was vulnerable in a way that made Derek acutely aware of the emotional territory they were entering. Around them, the picnic continued with laughter and conversation, but their bubble of intimacy felt separate from the larger gathering. "Being a single parent is terrifying," Derek said honestly. "Every decision feels like it could determine your child's entire future. But it's also clarifying. It strips away everything that doesn't really matter and helps you focus on what does." I'm not technically a single parent, Elise replied with a rueful smile. But the divorce, the custody arrangements, the constant juggling of schedules sometimes, it feels like I'm failing at both being present for Emma and being effective at work. Derek recognized the guilt in her voice, the familiar weight of feeling inadequate, despite obvious love and good intentions. You're not failing, he said firmly. Emma lights up when she talks about you. She's proud of what you do, proud of how hard you work. Kids understand more than we give them credit for. Their conversation was interrupted by shrieks of laughter from the playground, where Noah and Emma had organized an elaborate game involving the slide, the monkey bars, and several other children who had been drawn into their orbit. Derek watched his son take charge of the group dynamics with gentle leadership, helping younger children participate while ensuring everyone followed the rules they'd established. He's going to be a wonderful man, Elise observed, following Derek's gaze. You've raised him to be kind and confident without being entitled. That's not easy to achieve. Sarah gets most of the credit for his foundation, Derek said, the mention of his late wife creating a moment of complicated emotion. She died when he was 6, but she taught him how to treat people with respect and compassion. I've just tried not to mess up what she started. Elise was quiet for a moment, and Derek worried he'd created awkwardness by mentioning Sarah. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle rather than uncomfortable. She must have been an extraordinary woman to help create such an extraordinary son, Elise said, and such an extraordinary father. The compliment hung between them, laden with implications that neither was quite ready to address directly. Derek felt the familiar tug of attraction mixed with loyalty, the complexity of honoring his past while remaining open to his future. As the afternoon progressed, they found themselves naturally gravitating toward each other, sharing a picnic table, coordinating the supervision of their children, engaging in conversations that ranged from work challenges to parenting philosophies to childhood memories. Other employees began to notice their dynamic, offering knowing smiles and gentle teasing that suggested their connection was obvious to outside observers. "Uncle Derek, can you help me with the three-legged race?" Emma asked, appearing at his side with a length of rope and an expression of complete trust. The casual use of uncle struck Derek as both natural and significant evidence of how thoroughly their families had begun to interweave. "Only if Noah agrees to be my partner," Derek replied, ruffling Emma's hair with affection that felt as genuine as what he showed his own son. The three-legged race became a metaphor for their developing relationship, awkward at first, requiring communication and trust, but ultimately successful through cooperation and mutual support. Derek and Noah finished third out of 12 teams, but their real victory was the laughter they shared and the memory they created together. As the picnic wound down and families began collecting their belongings, Derek found himself reluctant to end the day. The natural family dynamic that had emerged between him, Noah, Elise, and Emma felt both wonderful and dangerous wonderful because it filled emotional spaces he hadn't realized were empty. Dangerous because it made him vulnerable to loss in ways he'd spent 2 years trying to avoid. "Would you like to have dinner together sometime?" Elise asked as they walked toward the parking area, her voice carefully casual but her meaning unmistakable. "I mean, all 4 of us. Emma's been asking when she can see Noah again, and I thought maybe we could make it a regular thing." Derek felt the weight of Sarah's ring against his chest, a physical reminder of the vows he'd made and the life he'd lost. But he also felt Noah's hand in his, warm and trusting, and saw the hope in Emma's eyes as she waited for his answer. "I'd like that," he said finally, the words feeling like both a promise and a risk. "I think we'd all like that very much." As they parted ways in the parking lot, Derek caught Elise's smile in his rearview mirror, look of possibility mixed with the same careful hope he felt stirring in his own chest. The drive home was quiet, Noah dozing in the passenger seat, but Derek's mind was active with questions about loyalty and love, about honoring the past while embracing the future. That night, as he helped Noah get ready for bed, his son's observations cut straight to the heart of Derek's internal struggle. "I like Elise, Noah said simply as Derek tucked him in. "She makes you smile the way you used to smile with Mom." The comment was innocent but profound, suggesting that Noah had noticed changes in his father, that Derek was still trying to understand himself. "Is that okay with you?" Derek asked, wanting to ensure his son felt safe to express any concerns or confusion about their evolving family dynamic. "I think Mom would want you to be happy." Noah replied with the wisdom that children sometimes possess about emotional truths that adults complicate with analysis and fear. "And I think Elise and Emma make us both happier." Later, alone in his bedroom, Derek held Sarah's ring in his palm and tried to imagine what she would say about his growing feelings for Elise. He could almost hear her voice, warm with love and tinged with gentle exasperation at his tendency to overthink emotional decisions. "Just be honest," she might have said, "about what you feel, about what you need, about what you're afraid of. The rest will work itself out." Derek slipped the ring back over his head, but for the first time in 2 years, it felt less like a barrier and more like a blessing knot, a chain keeping him tied to the past, but a reminder that he was capable of deep love and worthy of receiving it in return. The family photo sat on Derek's desk like a small revolution, capturing a moment of pure joy that had emerged organically from what was supposed to be a simple company event. In the image, Derek and Noah flanked Elise and Emma on a picnic blanket, all 4 of them laughing at something Noah had just said, their faces relaxed and genuinely happy. Linda from HR had taken the picture without asking, then quietly placed a printed copy on Derek's desk the following Monday with a note that simply said, "You all look like family." Derek studied the photograph during quiet moments throughout the week, marveling at how natural they appeared together. There was no forced posing, no artificial corporate smile, just 4 people who had found unexpected comfort in each other's company. The image represented possibilities he was still afraid to name aloud, even to himself. "That's a beautiful picture," Marcus observed, appearing at Derek's office door with a stack of program reports. "You all clean up well for a corporate picnic." Derek laughed, gesturing for Marcus to take a seat. Over the past 2 months, their professional relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship, built on mutual respect, and Marcus's gradual recognition that Derek's unconventional approach produced measurable results. "I still can't believe how much has changed since you started here," Marcus continued, settling into the chair across from Derek's desk. "The community engagement numbers are impressive, but what's really remarkable is how you've affected the company culture. People are more invested in their work, more collaborative. Even the executives are asking different kinds of questions during board meetings." "What kinds of questions?" Derek asked, genuinely curious about his impact beyond the programs he directly managed. "Questions about sustainability, about long-term community relationships rather than short-term publicity, wins. Yesterday, Elise told the board that our community programs needed to be measured by the strength of relationships we build rather than just the number of people we serve. That's your influence." Derek felt a surge of professional pride, mixed with something deeper, the satisfaction of knowing his values were being integrated into organizational decision-making at the highest levels. "That means a lot," he said. "I've been worried that my approach might be too informal for corporate expectations." "Your approach is exactly what we needed," Marcus replied firmly. "You've shown us that authenticity isn't incompatible with professionalism. It's actually essential for sustainable success." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the doorframe. Emma appeared with her school backpack and a shy smile, looking for permission to enter Derek's office. "Is it okay if I do my homework here?" she asked. "Mom's in a meeting, and Mrs. Patterson said you might help me with my math problems." Derek felt the familiar warmth that Emma's presence always brought, mixed with amazement at how naturally she'd become part of his daily routine. 3 times this week, she'd ended up in his office after school, either because Elise was delayed in meetings or because Emma had specifically requested his help with assignments that her father or tutors couldn't explain in ways that made sense to her. Of course, Derek said, clearing space on his desk while Marcus gathered his reports with an understanding smile. "What are we working on today?" "Fractions," Emma replied with a dramatic sigh that perfectly captured 8-year-old frustration with mathematical concepts. "I don't understand why we have to make things more complicated by cutting them into pieces." Marcus paused at the doorway, observing the easy familiarity between Derek and Emma with an expression of gentle approval. "I'll catch up with you later about the quarterly projections," he said. "This looks more important." As Marcus left, Derek helped Emma arrange her materials on his desk, noting how comfortable she'd become in his workspace. Her math book was covered with colorful stickers and her name written in the careful cursive of a child proud of her improving handwriting skills. "Okay," Derek said, settling beside her and examining the fraction problems. "Let's think about this differently. If I gave you a whole pizza and asked you to share it equally with 3 friends, how would you cut it?" Emma's face brightened with understanding as Derek drew circles on a scrap of paper, dividing them into equal sections and connecting abstract mathematical concepts to concrete experiences she could visualize. This was the approach that had made him effective in community outreach, taking complex systems and translating them into human terms that made intuitive sense. "I get it now," Emma exclaimed after working through several problems. "It's just like sharing, but with numbers to show how much each person gets." "Exactly," Derek confirmed, watching her tackle the remaining homework with new confidence. "Most math is just different ways of describing things we already understand from real life." As Emma worked, Derek found himself thinking about the parallels between his tutoring sessions and his community outreach work. In both cases, success came from meeting people where they were, rather than expecting them to adapt to predetermined systems. Whether he was helping a child understand fractions or helping a family navigate social services, the key was building bridges between unfamiliar concepts and familiar experiences. "Derek?" Emma's voice pulled him back to the present. "Can I ask you something personal?" The question was delivered with the seriousness that children brought to topics they'd been thinking about carefully. Derek nodded, curious about what might be weighing on her mind. "Do you think my mom likes being with us?" Emma asked, her voice carrying a vulnerability that made Derek's chest tighten with protective instincts. "I mean, with you and Noah. Sometimes she seems happier, but sometimes she gets that worried look like she's thinking too hard about something." The observation was remarkably perceptive, capturing the emotional complexity that Derek had also noticed in Elise's behavior. She seemed genuinely happy during their family dinners and weekend activities, but there were moments when he caught her looking distant or conflicted, as if she were questioning her own feelings or analyzing their developing relationship from multiple angles. "I think your mom cares about us very much," Derek said carefully, wanting to be honest without overstepping parental boundaries. "But caring about people can sometimes feel complicated, especially when it means making room in your life for new relationships. That doesn't mean the caring isn't real, it just means she wants to make sure she's making good decisions for both of you." Emma nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. "I worry that she works too much because she's afraid to be happy," she said with startling insight. "Like maybe she thinks if she stops working so hard, something bad will happen." The comment revealed a depth of understanding about her mother that impressed Derek, even as it concerned him. Emma had clearly been observing Elise's patterns of behavior and drawing conclusions about her emotional state with the clarity that sometimes came from a child's uncomplicated perspective. "What makes you think that?" Derek asked gently. "She used to work all the time, even on weekends," Emma explained. "But now she takes breaks to have dinner with us or help me with school projects. She seems happier when she does that, but then sometimes I catch her looking scared, like she's doing something wrong." Derek felt a surge of understanding mixed with affection for both Emma and her mother. Elise's worries were probably similar to his own, the fear of risking emotional stability, the guilt about prioritizing personal happiness when parental responsibilities felt overwhelming, the uncertainty about whether new love could coexist with past commitments. "Your mum loves you very much," Derek said softly, and I think she's learning to balance taking care of you with taking care of herself. That's not always easy for parents to figure out. Do you think she could learn to love Noah too? Emma asked with the directness that made adult conversations with children both wonderful and challenging. And maybe love you the way you love Noah? The question hung in the air between them, honest and hopeful in a way that cut straight through Derek's careful emotional defenses. Emma was asking about the possibility that had been growing in Derek's own heart, the chance that their informal family arrangement might become something deeper and more permanent. I think your mom already cares about Noah very much, Derek replied, choosing his words carefully. And I think she cares about me too. But love is complicated, especially for adults who want to make sure they're making the right choices for their children. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to her homework with the easy focus that children brought to tasks once their emotional questions had been addressed. But Derek found himself thinking about their conversation long after Emma had finished her math problems and returned to her mother's office. That evening, as Derek helped Noah with his own homework, he reflected on how their lives had become intertwined with Elise and Emma's in ways that felt both natural and significant. Their dinner plans, weekend activities, and even daily routines now included considerations of the other family's schedule and preferences. Noah asked about Emma's school projects. Emma sought Derek's help with challenging assignments, and both children had begun referring to their regular activities as family time. "Dad," Noah said, looking up from his reading assignment, "are we going to keep having dinners with Elise and Emma?" "Would you like to?" Derek asked, recognizing the importance of checking in with his son about their evolving relationships. "Yeah," Noah replied immediately. "Emma's really smart, and she makes good jokes. And Elise helps me with my science projects in ways that make more sense than the instruction books." Derek smiled at his son's practical assessment of their extended family dynamic. Noah had always been good at evaluating people based on how they treated him rather than abstract social categories. And his easy acceptance of Elise and Emma spoke to the genuine affection that had developed between them. "I think we'll keep having dinners together," Derek said. "But Noah, you know that means things might change for us, right? Not bad changes, but different ones." Noah considered this with the seriousness he brought to important topics. "Different how?" "Well, we might spend more time with them, maybe start thinking of them as part of our family," Derek explained. "That would mean new responsibilities, new relationships, maybe even new living arrangements eventually." "You mean like if you and Elise got married?" Noah asked with curiosity rather than concern. The direct question caught Derek off guard, but he recognized the importance of honest communication about possibilities that Noah was clearly already considering. "That's one possibility," Derek admitted. "But it would only happen if we all wanted it, and if we thought it would make everyone happier. What do you think about that idea?" Noah was quiet for a moment, his face thoughtful as he processed the implications. "I think it would be nice to have Emma as a real sister," he said finally, "and I think you smile more when Elise is around. Mom would want you to be happy, wouldn't she?" The wisdom in his son's observation struck Derek with unexpected force. Noah had not only noticed Derek's emotional state, but had connected it to what Sarah might have wanted, a perspective that felt like permission to embrace possibility rather than remain trapped by obligation to the past. That night, after Noah was asleep, Derek sat on their small balcony, looking out over the city lights and thinking about the family photo on his desk. The image represented more than just a moment captured during a company picnic. It symbolized the organic growth of love and connection that had surprised them all with its naturalness and strength. Sarah's ring still hung around his neck, but increasingly it felt like a blessing rather than a burden, a reminder that he was capable of creating the kind of deep, meaningful relationships that made life rich and worthwhile. The love he'd shared with Sarah had taught him how to recognize authentic connection when it appeared again, even in unexpected forms and circumstances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new moments of connection and careful navigation of the emotional territory they were all exploring together. But tonight, Derek felt a sense of gratitude for the way life had surprised him bringing love and family and professional fulfillment in ways he never could have anticipated when he handed his last $5 to a hungry child outside a downtown diner. Derek arrived at the office early on a rainy Thursday morning, intending to catch up on the community partnership proposals that had been accumulating on his desk while he'd been focused on direct family outreach. The building was nearly empty, with only security staff and a few dedicated early risers moving through the lobby. The quiet gave him space to think, to process the rapid changes in both his professional and personal life, without the constant interruptions that usually filled his days. He settled at his computer with coffee and a sense of purposeful focus, opening the files that contained Remtech's partnership agreements with local organizations. The work had become more complex as his role expanded, requiring him to balance relationship building with bureaucratic requirements, authentic engagement with measurable outcomes. As he scrolled through email attachments and spreadsheet data, Derek noticed something that made him pause. Buried in a folder labeled Executive Communications was a series of documents that seemed oddly familiar, reports about his own hiring, background checks, and what appeared to be surveillance information about his daily routines and family circumstances. Curious and increasingly concerned, Derek opened the files and found himself looking at a detailed dossier about his own life. The documents included his work schedules from both Uber and the warehouse, Noah's school information, photographs of their apartment building, and even transcripts of conversations he'd had with other drivers and co-workers. The surveillance had clearly been extensive and ongoing, predating his employment at Remtech by several weeks. One file particularly caught his attention, a folder labeled Target Assessment that contained a psychological profile describing him as financially vulnerable, emotionally driven, likely to respond positively to corporate opportunity if presented correctly. The clinical language made his skin crawl, reducing his life circumstances and personal struggles to data points in what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated recruitment strategy. But it was the final document in the folder that shattered Derek's sense of reality entirely. Security camera footage from Murphy's Diner, time-stamped from the night he'd given his last $5 to the hungry little girl. The footage showed multiple angles of the interaction, including clear shots of Elise's Tesla in the parking lot and timestamps proving she had arrived at the diner 15 minutes before Derek, not after as he'd believed. Additional footage showed Elise's movements that evening, her deliberate positioning across the street, her use of a phone to make what appeared to be a call, and most damning of all, the little girl approaching Elise's car window before walking to the diner steps where Derek would later find her. Derek felt his world tilt off its axis as the implications became clear. The encounter that had changed his life, the moment of authentic human connection that had led to everything good in his recent experience, had been orchestrated. Elise hadn't witnessed his spontaneous act of kindness. She had arranged for him to perform it, knowing exactly how he would respond, based on the psychological profile her investigators had compiled. His hands shook as he continued reading, finding email exchanges between Elise and a private investigation firm detailing his daily routines, financial pressures, and character assessment. The investigators had recommended the diner scenario as optimal for target engagement because it would appeal to subjects' demonstrated pattern of prioritizing others' needs despite personal hardship. The job offer, the community outreach position, even their developing personal relationship, all of it had been built on a foundation of manipulation and deception. Derek felt physically sick as he realized that what he'd experienced as authentic connection had been calculated corporate strategy, with himself as the unwitting target of an elaborate recruitment campaign. A sound in the hallway made Derek quickly close the files and minimize the windows, his heart racing as he tried to process what he'd discovered. Elise appeared in his doorway moments later, carrying her usual morning coffee and wearing the warm smile that had become associated with safety and possibility in Derek's mind. "You're here early," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk with familiar ease. I wanted to talk with you about the board presentation next week. They're excited to hear about the community programs, and I think your perspective would add authenticity to the metrics we'll be sharing. Derek stared at her, searching her face for signs of the deception he'd just discovered. Her expression was genuinely warm. Her interest in his input seemed authentic, and her body language conveyed the comfortable intimacy that had developed between them over the past 2 months. If he hadn't seen the surveillance files with his own eyes, he would never have suspected that their relationship was anything other than the organic connection he'd believed it to be. "Elise," Derek said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Something in his tone made her sit back slightly, her professional mask sliding into place as she recognized a shift in their dynamic. "Of course," she replied. "What's wrong?" "The night we met at Murphy's Diner," Derek began, watching her face carefully for any tells or signs of discomfort. "How did you know to be there? How did you know I would be there?" For just a moment, Derek saw something flicker across Elise's expression: surprise, calculation, and what might have been fear. But she recovered quickly, her corporate training kicking in to maintain composure under pressure. "I told you," she said evenly. "I was driving around after a difficult board meeting, and I stopped at the diner for coffee. I happened to witness your kindness to that little girl, and it impressed me enough to offer you a position here." Derek opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her, displaying the security footage from that night. "Then how do you explain this?" he asked quietly. Elise went very still as she watched the footage, her professional composure finally cracking as she realized the extent of what Derek had discovered. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of revealed deception and broken trust. "Derek, I can explain," she said finally, her voice smaller than he'd ever heard it. "Can you?" Derek replied, his voice containing a mixture of hurt and anger that surprised him with its intensity. "Can you explain why you had me investigated for weeks before we met? Can you explain why you arranged that entire encounter, including putting a hungry child on the street as bait? Can you explain how anything between us has been real when it was all based on corporate manipulation?" Elise's composure completely crumbled, tears appearing in her eyes as she faced the consequences of her deception. "It started as a recruitment strategy," she admitted quietly. "The board was pressuring me to find someone who could authentically connect with the communities we serve. Traditional hiring wasn't working. Everyone we interviewed felt scripted, corporate. So I hired investigators to find someone whose natural character would fit our needs. And you decided to manipulate that person instead of approaching them honestly," Derek said, his voice flat with disappointment. "The investigators identified you as someone with the qualities we needed, and they recommended the diner scenario as a way to observe your character under pressure." Elise continued, her words coming faster, as if speed might somehow make the confession less damaging. "But Derek, what happened after that first night, everything between us, between our families, that's been completely real?" Derek stood up from his desk, needing physical distance as he processed the scope of the deception. "How can I believe that?" he asked. "How can I believe anything you say when our entire relationship is built on a lie, when you've been studying me like a lab rat since before we even met?" "Because I fell in love with you," Elise said simply, the words hanging in the air between them like a desperate lifeline. "The job offer was strategic, but everything that came after was real. My feelings for you, Emma's attachment to you and Noah, the way you've changed my perspective on everything, none of that was planned or calculated." Derek felt the truth in her words, warring with the betrayal of her actions, creating an emotional dissonance that made it difficult to think clearly. "You put a child on the street," he said, focusing on the aspect of her deception that felt most unforgivable. "You used a hungry little girl as part of your corporate recruitment strategy." "She wasn't actually hungry," Elise said quickly, then immediately seemed to realize how defensive that sounded. "I mean, she was an actress, the daughter of one of our employees. She was never in any real danger or distress." The explanation somehow made Derek feel worse rather than better. Not only had Elise manipulated him, but she'd also orchestrated a performance designed to trigger his deepest, compassionate instincts for corporate purposes. "Everything I believed about that night was false," Derek said, his voice heavy with disillusionment. "My decision to help her, your reaction to witnessing it, the connection we felt afterward, all of it, was scripted corporate theater." "No," Elise said firmly, standing to face him directly. "Your impulse to help was completely genuine. That's exactly why the strategy worked, because you really are the kind of person who gives away his last $5 to help a child, even when he can't afford it. That authenticity is what I fell in love with." Derek stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman he'd grown to care about with the corporate executive who had orchestrated such an elaborate deception. "You studied my psychological profile," he said. "You knew exactly which buttons to push to get the response you wanted. How is that different from any other form of manipulation?" "Because the feelings it revealed were real," Elise replied desperately. "The kindness, the integrity, the way you put Noah's needs above your own comfort. I didn't create those qualities, Derek. I just found a way to see them clearly." Derek walked to his office window, looking out at the city where he'd struggled to provide for Noah, where he'd driven endless hours in his beat-up Honda, where he'd made the impossible choice to give away his last $5 to help someone else's child. The view from the 15th floor made his old life look small and distant, but right now it felt more honest than the corporate success he'd achieved through deception. "I need to resign," Derek said quietly, the words feeling inevitable even as they broke something inside him. "Derek, please," Elise said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Don't let my mistakes destroy something good. The work you're doing here, the families you're helping, the programs you've built, they're all making a real difference. And what's between us personally, what's between our children that's real too." Derek turned to face her, seeing the genuine distress in her expression, but unable to separate it from the calculated manipulation that had brought them to this point. "How can I trust any of it?" he asked. "How can I trust you? How can I work for a company that investigates and manipulates potential employees instead of approaching them honestly? Because you've already proven that authentic connection can coexist with corporate structure," Elise replied. "You've shown us how to be better than we were. Don't let my failure at the beginning erase all the good that's come from your work here." Derek shook his head, feeling the weight of disappointment settling into his chest like a physical ache. "I can't separate the good from the deception, Elise. Every success, every moment of connection, every feeling I've had, it's all contaminated by knowing it started with manipulation." "What about Noah and Emma?" Elise asked, playing what she clearly hoped was her strongest card. "What about their friendship, their happiness together? Are you going to destroy that because of my mistakes?" The mention of their children hit Derek exactly where Elise had intended, but instead of softening his resolve, it intensified his anger. "Don't you dare use our children to justify what you did," he said, his voice harder than she'd ever heard it. "Don't make them part of your manipulation too." Elise stepped back, as if he'd physically struck her, recognizing that she'd crossed a line that made reconciliation even more difficult. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for all of it. The investigation, the deception, the way I've handled this conversation. You deserved honesty from the beginning, and I was too afraid to risk rejection to give it to you." Derek looked at this woman he'd grown to love, seeing both the calculating executive who had orchestrated his recruitment and the vulnerable single mother who had opened her heart to him and Noah. The duality made him feel dizzy with conflicting emotions: betrayal and understanding, anger and compassion, love and the need for self-protection. "I believed in us," Derek said simply. "I believed that what we found together was real, that it meant something beyond convenience or strategy. Learning that it started as a corporate initiative makes me question everything that came after." "It was real," Elise insisted. "My feelings for you, your impact on Emma, the way you've changed my perspective on everything that matters, none of that was part of any plan. The plan ended the night I offered you the job. Everything since then has been me trying to become worthy of the man I manipulated into meeting me." Derek gathered his personal items from his desk, the family photo, a few handwritten thank you letters from community members, the small plant Noah had given him to brighten his workspace. The actions felt final, like preparations for a departure he didn't want to make but couldn't avoid. "Where does this leave us?" Elise asked, her voice small and uncertain. "I don't know," Derek replied honestly. "I need time to think, to figure out what's real and what's been influenced by your corporate strategy. I need to talk to Noah, to explain why things are going to change again, just when he was starting to feel secure. Derek, please don't make any permanent decisions while you're angry," Elise pleaded. "Take time if you need it, but don't close the door completely. What we've built together, all four of you's, it's worth fighting for." Derek paused at his office door, looking back at Elise with an expression of profound sadness mixed with something that might have been love under different circumstances. "The tragedy is that you're right," he said quietly. "What we built together was worth fighting for, but you built it on a foundation of lies, and now I don't know how to separate the authentic parts from the manipulation." As Derek walked through the Remtech offices for what he assumed would be the last time, he felt the weight of multiple losses: the job that had given him financial security and professional fulfillment, the relationship that had brought love back into his life, the extended family that had made Noah happier than he'd been since Sarah's death. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt interminable, each floor marking his descent from the corporate success that had transformed his life back to the uncertainty that had defined his existence before Elise Remington had orchestrated their meeting. But along with the sadness and anger, Derek felt something else: clarity about his own values and the importance of authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than strategic manipulation. His reflection in the elevator's polished walls looked older than he remembered, marked by the weight of revelation and the complexity of loving someone who had betrayed his trust while genuinely caring about his well-being. The man staring back at him was no longer the desperate single father who had given away his last $5, nor was he the confident corporate employee who had believed he'd found his place in the world through merit and authentic connection. He was something in between: someone who had learned to value himself enough to walk away from relationships built on deception, even when those relationships had brought genuine happiness and security. The lesson was painful but necessary, a reminder that self-respect sometimes required sacrificing comfort and possibility for the sake of integrity. As Derek drove away from the Remtech building, he realized that the hardest part would be explaining to Noah why their new life was ending, just as it had begun to feel permanent. But perhaps that conversation would also be an opportunity to teach his son about the importance of honesty in relationships, about the difference between love that honored your dignity and affection that required you to compromise your sense of truth. The rain that had started that morning continued to fall, washing the city clean, while Derek contemplated the difficult work of rebuilding trust, both in others and in his own judgment after, discovering that even the most beautiful connections could be rooted in deception. Derek's resignation letter sat on his kitchen table for 3 days, unsigned and somehow accusatory in its formal corporate language. He drafted it carefully, professionally, maintaining the courteous tone expected in business correspondence, while internally wrestling with emotions that ranged from betrayal to grief, to an anger that surprised him with its persistence. "I hereby submit my resignation from the position of Community Engagement Director at Remtech Solutions, effective immediately," the letter read. "I appreciate the opportunities provided during my employment and wish the company continued success in its community outreach initiatives." The words felt inadequate to capture the complexity of his situation, the professional fulfillment he was abandoning, the financial security he was sacrificing, the personal relationships that had become intertwined with corporate manipulation. But signing the letter felt like the only way to reclaim his integrity after discovering that his entire Remtech experience had been built on orchestrated deception. Noah had been unusually quiet since Derek had tried to explain why they wouldn't be seeing Elise and Emma anymore, why he would be looking for a new job, why their brief period of stability was ending just as it had begun to feel permanent. The boy's questions had been direct and heartbreaking. Did Elise lie to us about being our friend? And, does this mean Emma can't be my sister anymore? Forcing Derek to navigate the impossible territory of explaining adult deception to a child who had already experienced too much loss. I don't understand why you can't just forgive her. Noah had said during one of their difficult conversations. She said she was sorry, and she helped a lot of families, and she made us both happier. Isn't that what matters? The innocent wisdom in his son's observation had cut deeper than Derek expected, highlighting the possibility that his pride might be interfering with his judgment. But every time he considered the option of forgiveness, he remembered the surveillance files, the psychological profile, the calculated manipulation of his deepest compassionate instincts, and his resolve hardened again. The financial reality of his decision was becoming clearer each day. Without his Remtech salary, they would have to return to the careful budgeting and multiple jobs that had defined their pre-Elise existence. Derek had already contacted his former supervisor at the warehouse, who welcomed him back with understanding questions about his brief corporate career. The Uber driving would resume, along with the 18-hour days and constant worry about making ends meet. But along with the practical concerns came an unexpected sense of relief. The moral complexity of working for someone who had manipulated him was gone, replaced by the straightforward challenge of earning an honest living through transparent effort. There was dignity in labor that came without psychological games or hidden agendas, even if that labor was more physically demanding and financially precarious. Mrs. Chen had been predictably wise when Derek confided his situation to her, listening without judgment as he explained the deception and his decision to leave Remtech despite the personal cost. Pride is a expensive luxury, she had observed gently. But sometimes it's the only thing that lets you look at yourself in the mirror. You have to decide what price you're willing to pay for different kinds of peace. Her words echoed in Derek's mind as he went through the motions of rebuilding their old life. The apartment that had begun to feel temporary, as he'd imagined better possibilities now needed to accommodate their long-term reality again. Noah's brief period of not worrying about money was ending, though Derek was determined to shield his son from the worst of their financial stress. On Friday afternoon, Marcus appeared at Derek's door, not calling first, not scheduling a meeting through corporate channels, but simply showing up at their apartment building like a friend rather than a former colleague. Derek found him waiting in the lobby, looking uncomfortable in the informal setting, but clearly determined to have a conversation that couldn't happen at the office. "Can we talk?" Marcus asked without preamble. "Not about official business, but about what you're planning to do next." Derek led him upstairs to their small apartment, suddenly self-conscious about the contrast between their modest living space and the corporate environments where Marcus was accustomed to conducting business. But Marcus settled into the second-hand couch without comment, his attention focused on Derek rather than their surroundings. "The community programs are falling apart without you," Marcus said directly. "Not immediately, we're still operating on the systems you established, but the authentic connections you built are starting to fray. People are calling and asking specifically for you, and we don't have anyone who can replace what you brought to the work." Derek poured coffee for both of them, using the time to consider his response. Part of him felt satisfaction at being proven necessary, but a larger part felt genuine sadness about the families and organizations that might suffer because of the conflict between him and Elise. "I'm sorry about that," Derek said finally. "I know the programs help people, and I don't want my personal situation to interfere with that work. But I can't continue working for someone who manipulated me from our first meeting." Marcus nodded as if he'd expected this response. "I understand your position," he said. "But I also know Elise well enough to recognize when she's acting from genuine emotion rather than corporate strategy. Her feelings for you, her distress about losing you, that's real, even if her initial approach was calculated." "How can I trust that distinction?" Derek asked. "How can I separate authentic emotion from corporate manipulation when they've been intertwined from the beginning?" "Because I've watched her change since you started working with us," Marcus replied. The woman who hired investigators to orchestrate your recruitment wouldn't have spent last week crying in her office, wouldn't have offered to restructure the entire community engagement department around your vision, wouldn't have written a formal apology to the board of directors acknowledging her unethical hiring practices. This was new information, and Derek felt his carefully maintained anger wavering slightly as he processed what Marcus was telling him. She apologized to the board? She told them everything, Marcus confirmed. The investigation, the staged encounter, the deception involved in your hiring. She took full responsibility and offered her resignation, but the board refused to accept it because your programs have been too successful and because they believe her remorse is genuine. Derek walked to his kitchen window, looking out at the view he'd grown accustomed to before his brief ascension to corporate success. The knowledge that Elise had risked her own position to acknowledge her mistakes added complexity to his understanding of her motives, but it didn't erase the fundamental breach of trust that had brought them to this point. "Why are you telling me this?" Derek asked. "Because you deserve to know the full picture before you make a permanent decision," Marcus replied. "And because there's something else you should consider: the community event next week." Derek had forgotten about Remtech's annual community celebration, a large gathering where they showcased their programs and honored the families they'd served. He'd been instrumental in planning the event, working with community leaders to ensure it felt authentic rather than corporate, focusing on relationship building rather than publicity. "Over 200 families are expecting to see you there," Marcus continued. "People you've helped directly, organizations you've partnered with, children whose parents you've tutored. They don't know about the conflict between you and Elise. They just know that Derek Cole helped them when they needed it, and they want to thank you publicly." The thought of disappointing those families, of abandoning people who had come to trust him, created a new layer of moral complexity that Derek hadn't anticipated. His resignation from Remtech was a personal decision based on principles and self-respect, but it would have consequences for people who had nothing to do with corporate manipulation or romantic deception. "What are you asking me to do?" Derek said. "I'm asking you to attend the community event," Marcus replied, "not as a Remtech employee, but as someone who cares about the people you've been helping. Let them thank you. Let them know their gratitude matters to you, and give yourself a chance to see the positive impact of your work separate from the corporate drama." Derek considered the request, recognizing both its merit and its potential complications. Attending the event would mean seeing Elise again, confronting the complex emotions he'd been trying to avoid, and risking the possibility that his resolve might weaken in the face of genuine community appreciation. "I'll think about it," Derek said finally. Marcus stood to leave, but paused at the door with one final observation. "You know, Derek, one of the things that made you effective in community outreach was your ability to see past people's mistakes to their essential character. You helped families who had made poor financial decisions, supported parents who had struggled with addiction, worked with organizations that had failed in previous programs. You understood that people could change, that past mistakes didn't define future possibilities." After Marcus left, Derek sat alone in his apartment, contemplating the parallel his former colleague had drawn. Was his refusal to forgive Elise's deception consistent with the compassionate approach he brought to community work? Or was it a defensive reaction that prevented him from applying his own principles to his personal life? That evening, as Derek helped Noah with homework at their kitchen table, his son asked a question that cut to the heart of his internal conflict. "Dad, do you think Emma is sad that we can't be friends anymore?" Derek looked at his son's worried expression and felt the weight of decisions that affected more than just his own pride and sense of betrayal. "I think she probably is sad," he admitted. "Could we call her?" Noah asked hopefully, "just to make sure she knows we still care about her, even if the grown-ups are fighting." The request was reasonable and kind, reflecting the emotional intelligence that made Derek proud of his son, even in the midst of their complicated circumstances. But it also represented a step toward reconnection that Derek wasn't sure he was ready to take. "Let me think about that too," Derek said. adding Noah's request to the growing list of decisions that required him to balance personal integrity with compassion for others affected by his choices. As bedtime approached and Derek went through their familiar evening routine, he found himself thinking about the unsigned resignation letter on his kitchen table, the community event where people wanted to thank him, and the possibility that forgiveness might require more courage than maintaining anger. The reflection in his bathroom mirror showed a man wrestling with questions that had no easy answers about trust and redemption, about the relationship between personal pride and social responsibility, about whether love could survive deception if the deception was acknowledged, and the love had proven itself through subsequent actions. Derek touched Sarah's ring where it hung against his chest, wondering what she would advise about this situation that combined professional ethics with personal relationships in ways he'd never had to navigate before. Her voice in his memory was characteristically direct. What would you tell Noah to do if he were facing this choice? The question reframed everything, forcing Derek to consider whether his response to Elise's deception reflected the values he wanted to model for his son, values of integrity and self-respect, certainly, but also values of forgiveness and the belief in people's capacity for change. Tomorrow would bring new complications and decisions, but tonight Derek felt the first stirrings of possibility that his story with Elise might not be over, that their connection might be strong enough to survive even the revelation of its deceptive origins. The thought was both hopeful and terrifying, requiring him to risk his heart again, just when he'd learned how thoroughly it could be manipulated by someone he'd learned to trust. Derek found Emma's drawing wedged under his car's windshield wiper on Saturday morning, the paper slightly damp from overnight dew, but the crayon artwork still vibrant with childish optimism. The image showed 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun, 2 adults and 2 children, with careful labels in Emma's developing handwriting. Dad Derek, Mom, Emma, and Noah. Above the figures, in purple crayon, she had written, "Our family at the zoo," with a heart drawn beside each word. The drawing hit Derek with unexpected emotional force, reminding him of the innocent happiness that had flourished between their children while the adults navigated complex questions of trust and authenticity. Emma had somehow managed to deliver this message without her mother's knowledge, an 8-year-old's attempt to preserve something beautiful that the grown-ups seemed determined to destroy through their complicated principles. Derek studied the simple artwork, noting how Emma had drawn him with a smile that seemed to capture his genuine happiness during their family outings. Before he'd learned about the surveillance and orchestrated manipulation, the child's perspective was uncomplicated by corporate strategy or wounded prejudice, had experienced love and stability and family connection, and she wanted those things to continue regardless of the adult drama that threatened to end them. His phone buzzed with a text message, and Derek's heart rate accelerated when he saw Elise's name on the screen. They hadn't communicated since his discovery of the surveillance files, and he wasn't sure he was ready for whatever conversation she might be initiating. "Derek, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but Emma has been asking every day when she can see Noah again. I understand if you need space from me, but could the children have a play date? They don't deserve to lose their friendship because of my mistakes." The message was carefully neutral, focused on the children's needs rather than attempting to address their personal relationship. Derek recognized the strategy. Elise was approaching him as a fellow parent rather than as the woman who had deceived him, appealing to his love for Noah rather than trying to reignite romantic feelings that might no longer exist. Before he could craft a response, Noah appeared at his bedroom window, having spotted the drawing in Derek's hands. "Is that from Emma?" he asked hopefully, his face pressed against the glass with the enthusiasm that only children brought to reconnecting with friends they missed. Derek walked inside and handed Noah the artwork, watching his son's face light up as he studied Emma's representation of their family. The boy's happiness was uncomplicated by knowledge of corporate manipulation or adult deception. He simply saw evidence that someone he cared about was thinking of him and wanted their relationship to continue. "Can we call her?" Noah asked, echoing his request from the previous evening. I want to tell her that I like her drawing, and I want to know if she finished her science project. Derek looked at his son's hopeful expression and felt his carefully maintained resolve beginning to crack. The children's friendship had developed independently of the adult complications, and their innocent affection for each other deserved protection from the mistakes that had contaminated the romantic relationship. What if we invited Emma to spend the afternoon with us? Derek suggested, surprising himself with the offer. We could go to the park, maybe get ice cream, just the three of us. Would you like that? Noah's enthusiastic response made the decision feel inevitable, and Derek found himself texting Elise back before he could reconsider the wisdom of maintaining any connection to the woman who had orchestrated his recruitment through psychological manipulation. The kids can have a play date this afternoon if Emma wants to. Griffith Park at 2 p.m. I think they both need to know their friendship doesn't depend on adult complications. Elise's reply came within minutes. Thank you. Emma will be so happy. I'll drop her off and pick her up. You don't have to see me if you'd prefer not to. The consideration in her response surprised Derek, suggesting that she understood his need for emotional distance, even while facilitating their children's continued relationship. It was a mature response that acknowledged the complexity of their situation without trying to manipulate him into forgiveness or reconciliation. That afternoon, Derek watched Emma run toward Noah across the park grass with the unrestrained joy that children brought to reunions with beloved friends. The girl threw her arms around Noah with obvious relief, as if she'd been worried that their separation might be permanent, and Noah responded with equal enthusiasm. I missed you, Emma said simply, taking Noah's hand as they walked toward the playground equipment. Mom said you and my mom had a fight, but I told her that didn't mean we had to fight too. Derek felt a pang of recognition at Emma's wisdom, the child's instinctive understanding that adult conflicts didn't have to destroy relationships between people who genuinely cared about each other. He settled on a park bench where he could supervise their play while giving them space to reconnect naturally. As the children played, Derek found himself thinking about the community event that Marcus had mentioned, the gathering where families wanted to thank him for his work. The thought of disappointing people who had benefited from his programs continued to trouble him, creating tension between his personal need for integrity and his professional commitment to community service. "Derek," Emma called from the top of the slide, "watch this." She performed an elaborate sliding technique that made Noah laugh with delight, and Derek found himself smiling despite the emotional complexity of the situation. For the next 2 hours, Derek observed the easy friendship between the children, noting how they picked up their relationship exactly where they'd left off, despite the week-long separation. They discussed Emma's science project, Noah's upcoming book report, and their shared plan to build a fort in Emma's backyard the next time they had a sleepover. The casual mention of future plans created a bittersweet pang in Derek's chest, reminding him that his decision to maintain distance from Elise would inevitably affect the children's friendship. They were already making assumptions about continued contact that might not be realistic, given the adult complications. When it came time to return Emma to her mother, Derek felt the familiar tension that accompanied any potential encounter with Elise. She had suggested dropping Emma off and picking her up to avoid forcing Derek into unwanted contact, but the logistics of the park meeting made some interaction inevitable. Elise was waiting by her car when they returned, wearing jeans and a simple sweater that made her look more like a regular parent than the corporate executive who had orchestrated his recruitment. Her expression was carefully neutral, friendly toward the children, but respectful of Derek's need for emotional distance. "Did you have fun?" she asked Emma, who launched into an enthusiastic account of their afternoon activities, while Noah stood quietly beside Derek, uncertain about the social dynamics he didn't fully understand. "Thank you for letting them spend time together," Elise said to Derek, her voice formal but genuinely grateful. "I know this situation is complicated, but Emma has been so much happier just knowing she could see Noah again." Derek nodded, unsure how to respond to her gratitude without either encouraging false hope or appearing unnecessarily cold. The woman standing before him was both the person who had deceived him and the mother who loved Emma enough to prioritize her daughter's friendship over her own romantic disappointment. "Derek," Elise said quietly, stepping slightly away from the children who were engaged in final goodbyes. "I know you probably won't want to hear this, but I need you to know that my feelings for you were never part of any corporate strategy. Everything that developed between us personally was genuine, even if the circumstances that brought us together were not." Derek studied her face, looking for signs of continued manipulation or corporate calculation, but seeing only the vulnerability of a woman who had made a significant mistake and was trying to acknowledge it without making excuses. "I believe that your feelings became genuine," Derek replied carefully. "But that doesn't change the fact that you studied my psychological profile and engineered our meeting to exploit my character traits for corporate purposes. Even genuine emotions can't erase that foundation of deception." Elise nodded as if she'd expected this response, her expression accepting rather than defensive. "I understand," she said simply. "I just wanted you to know that losing you both professionally and personally has been the consequence of my own choices, not some inevitable outcome. You deserved honesty from the beginning, and I failed to give it to you." The acknowledgement felt more genuine than any apology she might have offered, recognizing responsibility without expecting forgiveness in return. Derek felt something loosen in his chest, not enough to restore trust, but sufficient to reduce the sharp edge of his anger. As Emma reluctantly said goodbye to Noah and climbed into her mother's car, Derek caught Elise's eye one final time. "The community event next week," he said impulsively. "Marcus told me about the families who want to thank me. I've been thinking about attending, not as a Remtech employee, but as someone who cares about the people we helped." Elise's face brightened with hope, but she was careful not to read too much into his statement. "That would mean a lot to them," she said. "And Derek, whatever you decide about us personally, your work in the community was valuable and authentic. Don't let my mistakes make you question the good you accomplished." As they parted ways in the parking lot, Derek felt a shift in his emotional landscape. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that the situation was more complex than simple betrayal and manipulation. Elise had deceived him, but she had also created opportunities for genuine positive change in people's lives. Her feelings for him had originated in corporate strategy, but they had evolved into something that seemed authentic in its consequences, if not its origins. The drive home was quiet, Noah processing the afternoon's reunion and the subtle emotional currents he had observed between the adults. Derek found himself thinking about the community event, about the families who wanted to thank him, about the possibility that attending might provide clarity about what aspects of his Remtech experience had been worth preserving despite the deceptive foundation. "Dad," Noah said as they pulled into their apartment complex, "Emma asked if she could come to the big party next week where people want to say thank you to you. She said her mum told her you might not go, but she really wants to be there when people tell you how much you helped them." The information added another layer of complexity to Derek's decision, the knowledge that Emma wanted to witness public recognition of his community work, that she took pride in what he had accomplished, even if the circumstances of his employment had been problematic. That evening, as Derek helped Noah get ready for bed, he found himself looking at Emma's drawing again, studying the simple representation of family happiness that seemed to transcend the adult complications that threatened to destroy it. The artwork was a reminder that love and connection could emerge from imperfect circumstances, that authentic relationships could develop even when their origins were less than ideal. The unsigned resignation letter still sat on his kitchen table, but Derek no longer felt the same urgency about making it official. Perhaps attending the community event would provide the clarity he needed about which aspects of his Remtech experience deserved to be preserved and which needed to be abandoned in the service of his integrity and self-respect. The Remtech community celebration was held in the same Griffith Park pavilion where Derek had first felt like part of a corporate family. But his arrival as a reluctant guest, rather than an employee, created an entirely different emotional landscape. He stood at the edge of the gathering, watching families arrange potluck dishes and children run between picnic tables, feeling simultaneously connected to and separate from the scene before him. Noah stayed close to his side, unusually quiet, as he observed the crowd of people they both recognized from Derek's community outreach work. Emma spotted them from across the pavilion and waved enthusiastically, but she remained beside her mother rather than running over, perhaps sensing the delicate, emotional territory that surrounded Derek's attendance. "Mr. Derek," the voice belonged to Maria Santos, the single mother whose daughter had won third place in the science fair with Derek's help. She approached with her daughter Elena in tow, both of them beaming with the kind of genuine happiness that made Derek remember why he'd found community work so fulfilling. "We've been looking for you everywhere," Maria continued, switching fluidly between English and Spanish, as she often did when excited. "Elena has something she wants to show you." The little girl proudly displayed a ribbon from a recent academic competition, her face glowing with accomplishment. "I won second place in the district math contest," she announced, "and it's because you taught me that math is just another way of solving puzzles." Derek knelt to Elena's level, feeling the familiar warmth that came from witnessing a child's academic confidence. "That's wonderful," he said genuinely, "but you won that ribbon because you worked hard and didn't give up when the problems got difficult. But you showed me how to not be scared of not knowing the answer right away." Elena replied with the directness that made conversations with children both challenging and rewarding. "You said it was okay to try different ways until one of them worked." As Derek stood to accept Maria's heartfelt thanks, he noticed a small crowd forming around the mother families he'd worked with, community leaders he'd partnered with, children whose homework struggles he'd helped resolve. The gathering felt organic rather than orchestrated, people drawn by genuine recognition rather than corporate scheduling. "Derek, we need to talk to you," said James Patterson, director of the Roosevelt Elementary after-school program. "The tutoring initiative you helped us develop has increased our kids' homework completion rate by 60%. Parents are asking specifically for the family-inclusive approach you designed." More families approached, each carrying stories of how Derek's community work had affected their daily lives in tangible ways. Mrs. Prentes Rodriguez described how the Utility Assistance Program navigation had kept her family's electricity on during a difficult month. David Kim explained how Derek's job interview coaching had helped him land his first stable employment in 3 years. The recognition felt overwhelming and humbling simultaneously, reminding Derek that his work had created ripple effects in people's lives that extended far beyond corporate metrics or program evaluations. These families weren't praising Remtech's community engagement statistics. They were thanking Derek personally for seeing them as individuals rather than service recipients. From across the pavilion, Derek caught sight of Elise watching the informal gathering with an expression of complex emotions, pride in his accomplishments, mixed with sadness about their personal situation. She made no move to approach or insert herself into the conversations, respecting his need for space, while clearly taking satisfaction in seeing Derek receive the recognition he deserved. "Are you coming back to work with us?" asked Carmen Vasquez, a community organizer Derek had partnered with on several housing initiatives. "The new person they assigned doesn't understand the neighborhood dynamics the way you do. They want to run programs at us instead of with us." The question cut to the heart of Derek's internal conflict, forcing him to confront the possibility that his resignation might damage programs that were genuinely helping people regardless of the circumstances surrounding his original hiring. "I'm not sure yet," Derek replied honestly. "There are some complications I'm trying to work through." "Well, figure it out fast," Carmen said with the no-nonsense directness that had made their partnership effective. "These families need advocates who understand what it's like to struggle, not just people who study poverty from a distance." As the afternoon progressed, Derek found himself drawn into deeper conversations about specific programs and their impact on community welfare. The families weren't just expressing gratitude, they were sharing details about how his approach had differed from previous corporate outreach efforts. how his personal experience with financial hardship had informed his understanding of their challenges. "You never made us feel like charity cases," observed Patricia Williams, whose teenage son Derek had helped prepare for college applications. "You treated us like partners, like we had something valuable to contribute to solving our own problems." The comment resonated with Derek's understanding of what had made his community work successful, the recognition that people facing challenges possessed insights and resources that outsiders often overlooked, that effective help required collaboration rather than condescension. Emma finally approached during a brief lull in the conversations. Her steps, tentative as she navigated the complex social dynamics she sensed but didn't fully understand. "Derek," she said quietly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Derek stepped away from the adult conversations, noting how Noah naturally positioned himself to include Emma in their small family unit, despite the tension between their parents. "I wanted to give you this," Emma said, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. It was another drawing, this one showing Derek surrounded by smiling faces with the caption, "Thank you, Derek," written in her careful handwriting. "I drew all the people who told me you helped them," she explained. "I wanted you to know that even if my mom made mistakes, the good things you did were still real." The 8-year-old's wisdom struck Derek with unexpected force. Her ability to separate his valuable work from the complicated circumstances of his employment, offering a perspective he'd been struggling to achieve on his own. "Thank you, Emma," Derek said softly, accepting the drawing with genuine emotion. "This means more to me than you know." "Are you going to keep helping families?" Emma asked directly. "Because they really need you, and I think you need them too. You're happier when you're helping people." Before Derek could formulate an answer, Marcus appeared at his side with a manila folder and an expression of professional urgency tempered by personal concern. "Derek, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something you need to see," Marcus said. "It's about the partnership proposal you submitted before everything happened. The City Council approved it unanimously yesterday, and they're requesting a meeting with you specifically to discuss implementation." Marcus opened the folder to reveal official documents bearing the Los Angeles City seal, authorizing a comprehensive community support program based on Derek's recommendations for family-centered assistance rather than traditional service delivery models. "They want to fund this at the municipal level," Marcus continued, his voice carrying excitement despite the awkward circumstances. "Full implementation across 6 districts, with you as the lead coordinator. Derek, this is exactly the kind of systemic change you said was needed to make community programs actually effective." Derek stared at the official documents, recognizing language and concepts he'd developed during his time at Remtech, but seeing them now elevated to city policy level. The program design reflected everything he'd learned about authentic community, engagement, relationship building over service delivery, empowerment over charity, long-term partnership over short-term assistance. "The catch is that they want Remtech as the implementing partner," Marcus added, his tone acknowledging the complication this created for Derek's current situation. "The city specifically requested that you remain as the point person for program development and community liaison work." Emma tugged at Derek's sleeve, her young face serious with the kind of concern that children displayed when they sensed adult decisions that might affect their world. "Does this mean you're going to keep helping families?" she asked hopefully. Derek looked around the pavilion, taking in the families who had approached him throughout the afternoon. The children whose academic confidence he'd helped build, the parents whose economic stability he'd supported through crisis intervention and skill development. The community celebration had reminded him that his work had meaning beyond corporate politics or romantic complications. It represented genuine positive change in people's daily lives. "Can I see the full proposal?" Derek asked Marcus, his voice carefully neutral as he processed the implications of this development. As Derek reviewed the documents, he noticed Elise approaching their small group with obvious hesitation. Her body language suggested she wanted to participate in the conversation, but was uncertain whether her presence would be welcome given their personal situation. "Derek," she said quietly, "I wanted you to know that I had nothing to do with this city proposal. The council contacted us directly based on community feedback about your programs. This recognition is entirely based on your work and its impact." Derek studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or corporate strategy, but seeing only the careful honesty of someone trying to rebuild trust through transparency rather than persuasion. "Furthermore," Elise continued, "if you decide to accept the city coordinator position, I would propose restructuring your role to give you complete autonomy over program development and implementation. You would report directly to the city rather than to Remtech management, with full authority to design community engagement approaches according to your own principles." Marcus looked surprised by this offer, which apparently went beyond what had been discussed in previous corporate conversations. "Elise, that would essentially make Derek an independent contractor using Remtech resources rather than a Remtech employee. That's a significant departure from our usual structure." "Then maybe our usual structure needs to change," Elise replied, her attention focused on Derek rather than Marcus. "The community feedback has been clear. Derek's approach works because it's authentic and relationship-based. Trying to fit that into traditional corporate hierarchy was my mistake from the beginning." Derek felt the weight of multiple decisions converging the opportunity to implement community programs at a scale he'd never imagined, the chance to work with authentic autonomy rather than corporate oversight, and the possibility of rebuilding a professional relationship with Elise based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. "What about our personal situation?" Derek asked directly, wanting to address the complexity that had been underlying all their interactions since his discovery of the surveillance files. Elise was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I would hope that we could find a way to coexist professionally that serves the community's needs, regardless of whether we can resolve our personal complications," she said finally. "My feelings for you haven't changed, but I understand that trust, once broken, may not be repairable. I don't want my mistakes to prevent you from doing work that makes a difference in people's lives." The conversation was interrupted by Noah tugging at Derek's hand, his small face urgent with 8-year-old concern. "Dad, Mrs. Santos is crying," he observed, pointing toward the edge of the pavilion where Maria was engaged in intense conversation with several other parents. Derek approached the group and discovered that Maria was indeed emotional, but with relief rather than distress. "We just heard about the city program," she explained through tears of gratitude. "Family advocacy, services, job training, coordination, educational support that includes parents, everything you said we needed, but bigger than we ever imagined possible." "You did this," added Carmen Vasquez, her voice firm with conviction. "Your proposal, your understanding of what actually helps versus what just looks good in reports. This could change everything for families in our situation." Derek felt the full weight of the opportunity before him, the chance to implement his vision for community support at a scale that could affect thousands of families. The possibility of proving that authentic relationship-based approaches could work within larger institutional frameworks. "I need to think about this," Derek said, addressing both the community members and his former colleagues. "This is bigger than just accepting a job. It's about committing to a long-term vision that would affect many people's lives." "Take the time you need," Marcus replied. "But Derek, opportunities like this don't come around often. The city is offering you a chance to implement exactly what you believe in, with the resources and authority to make it work." As the community celebration began to wind down, Derek found himself standing with Noah, Emma, and Elise in a moment of unexpected family unity, despite the complicated circumstances that had brought them to this point. The children were tired but happy, their afternoon together having reinforced their natural friendship regardless of adult complications. "Whatever you decide about the job," Elise said quietly, "I want you to know that watching you work with these families has reminded me why I started Remtech in the first place. Your authenticity has changed, not just our programs, but our entire approach to corporate responsibility. Derek looked at the woman who had manipulated their initial meeting, but who had also created the platform for his most meaningful professional work. The complexity of their relationship, a personal betrayal, intertwined with professional opportunity, romantic disappointment, mixed with mutual respect for shared values, defied simple resolution. "I'll give you an answer about the city coordinator position next week," Derek said finally. "But Elise, if I accept, it will be because the work matters, not because I've forgiven the deception that brought us together." "I understand," Elise replied, her acceptance genuine rather than hopeful. "I've learned that the most important relationships aren't necessarily the easiest ones, and that sometimes the best way to show love is to step back and let people make their own choices." As they prepared to leave the pavilion, Derek carried Emma's drawings in one hand and the city proposal documents in the other, tangible representations of the personal connections and professional opportunities that had emerged from the most complicated chapter of his adult life. The drive home was quiet, Noah dozing in the passenger seat, while Derek contemplated decisions that would affect not just their family's future, but the lives of countless community members who had placed their trust in his ability to advocate for authentic, relationship-based support services. The resignation letter still waited on his kitchen table, but Derek no longer felt the same urgency about making it official. Perhaps forgiveness and trust were separate considerations. Perhaps he could work with Elise professionally while maintaining appropriate boundaries personally. Perhaps authentic community service could coexist with complicated human relationships. Tomorrow would bring new conversations and decisions, but tonight Derek felt the deep satisfaction that came from being recognized for work that reflected his deepest values, regardless of the imperfect circumstances that had made that work possible. 6 months later, Derek stood in the community garden he had helped create behind Roosevelt Elementary School, watching Noah and Emma work side by side, planting tomato seedlings, while their classmates distributed mulch and watering cans under the supervision of parent volunteers. The garden represented everything Derek had learned about authentic community engagement. He was designed by the families who would tend it, funded through partnerships between multiple organizations, and maintained through ongoing relationships rather than one-time service delivery. The city coordinator position had exceeded Derek's most optimistic expectations, providing him with the authority and resources to implement programs based on relationship building rather than bureaucratic requirements. His office was located in the community center rather than a corporate building. His schedule was determined by family needs rather than administrative convenience, and his success was measured by the strength of connections formed rather than the number of services delivered. "Derek, the partnership agreement is ready for your signature," said Linda Martinez, who had followed him from Remtech to become the program's administrative director. She had adapted to community-based work with enthusiasm, trading her corporate attire for practical clothes suitable for home visits and neighborhood meetings. Derek reviewed the document that would formalize their collaboration with 3 additional school districts, expanding their family advocacy services to reach nearly 10,000 households across Los Angeles. The growth felt sustainable rather than overwhelming because it was built on proven relationships and community-tested approaches rather than theoretical program designs. "The board meeting went well yesterday," Linda continued. "Even the skeptical members admitted that our retention rates and family satisfaction scores are unlike anything they've seen in traditional social services. They're requesting a presentation to the state legislature about scaling the model statewide." Derek felt pride in the recognition, but more importantly, he felt deep satisfaction in knowing that the work was genuinely helping families navigate complex challenges with dignity and support rather than condescension and charity. The psychological profile that had once been used to manipulate him had proven accurate in unexpected way. She was indeed someone who responded to others' needs with instinctive generosity, but channeling that instinct through professional structures had created sustainable positive change. "Derek!" Emma called from the garden bed where she and Noah were debating the optimal spacing for tomato plants. Noah says we should plant them closer together, but I think they need more room to grow. Who's right? Derek approached the children, noting how naturally they had assumed co-leadership roles in their gardening project, despite being among the youngest volunteers. Their friendship had not only survived the complications between their parents, but had deepened into something resembling sibling affection. "What does the seed packet say?" Derek asked, guiding them toward research-based decision-making, rather than simply providing answers. Emma pulled out the instructions and read aloud the recommended spacing guidelines, her reading skills having improved dramatically since Derek had begun helping with her homework on a regular basis. 18 inches apart, she announced. So I was right. But Noah's idea about making rows closer together is also good. Derek watched the children negotiate their planting strategy with the collaborative spirit that characterized most of their interactions. Their ability to find compromise and shared solutions reminded him daily of possibilities for adult relationships if pride and past hurt could be set aside in favor of common goals. Elise appeared at the garden gate, carrying coffee for the adult volunteers and wearing jeans that had actual dirt stains from previous gardening sessions. Over the past 6 months, she had gradually earned her way back into Derek's professional trust through consistent actions rather than words supporting his program decisions without interference, advocating for his recommendations in corporate and municipal meetings, and maintaining appropriate personal boundaries while remaining committed to collaborative parenting. The district supervisor wants to discuss expanding the job training component, Elise said, approaching Derek with the careful respect that had characterized their rebuilt professional relationship. Apparently, our approach of including family members in skills development has produced better employment outcomes than individual-focused programs. Derek nodded, understanding the implications. Traditional job training treated unemployment as an individual failing rather than recognizing how family circumstances, transportation challenges, and childcare needs affected employment stability. Their program addressed those systemic issues alongside skills development, producing more sustainable results. "I'd like to sit in on that meeting," Derek replied, "but I want to bring Maria Santos and David Kim as community representatives. Their insights about what actually supports employment stability are more valuable than external consultant recommendations." Elise smiled, the expression carrying warmth that had been carefully absent from their early professional interactions. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The city loves that we center community voices in policy development rather than just consulting them as afterthoughts." As the afternoon gardening session concluded and families began cleaning up tools and gathering their children, Derek found himself standing beside Elise in comfortable silence, watching Noah and Emma coordinate the watering schedule with other young gardeners. "Derek," Elise said quietly, "I know we've never fully resolved our personal situation, but I wanted you to know that I'm grateful for the second chance you gave me professionally. Working with you has reminded me what authentic leadership looks like." Derek considered his response carefully, recognizing that their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated: professional partnership built on mutual respect and shared commitment to community service, combined with successful co-parenting that prioritized their children's needs over their own complicated emotions. "I've learned that trust and forgiveness are different things," Derek replied thoughtfully. "I may never fully trust the way our relationship began, but I've learned to trust your commitment to doing right by the families we serve. That's been enough to build something meaningful professionally." Elise nodded, accepting the distinction without pushing for more personal reconciliation than Derek was prepared to offer. "The children are lucky to have you as a role model," she said. "You've taught them that integrity doesn't require perfection, just the willingness to keep trying to do better." As families departed from the community garden, Derek helped Noah pack up their tools, while Emma organized the watering supplies with the methodical care she brought to most tasks. The children's easy partnership in practical matters reflected the family dynamic that had evolved organically despite the complicated history between their parents. "Dad," Noah said as they walked toward Derek's car. Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you can help with the science fair organization again this year. She said your approach made it more fun for families instead of just stressful for kids. Derek smiled, remembering how traditional science fairs had often created competition and anxiety rather than fostering genuine interest in learning. His modifications family participation encouraged, multiple award categories, emphasis on process over product had transformed the event into community celebration rather than academic pressure. I'll talk to her about it, Derek agreed. But Noah, remember that helping organize the fair means you'll have extra responsibilities too. Are you ready for that? Emma and I already talked about it. Noah replied with the matter-of-fact tone he used when discussing plans that included his chosen sister. We want to help younger kids with their projects the way you helped Elena with her volcano. The casual reference to Elena Santos reminded Derek of the night that had changed his life, giving away his last $5 to help a child who turned out to be part of an elaborate corporate recruitment strategy. The memory no longer carried the sharp pain of betrayal it once had, but rather the complex recognition that meaningful relationships could emerge from imperfect origins if nurtured with honesty and care. That evening, Derek sat on his apartment balcony with a cup of coffee, and the satisfaction that came from work aligned with personal values. The city coordinator position had provided financial security without requiring him to compromise his principles, and the community relationships he'd built felt sustainable rather than extractive. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. Saw article about your program in the newspaper. Very proud of you, Derek. Sarah would be proud too. The message from his elderly neighbor carried the warmth of long-term relationship and the wisdom of someone who had observed his journey from desperate single father to recognized community advocate. Mrs. Chen's continued presence in their lives represented the kind of authentic connection that sustained people through both struggles and successes. Derek touched Sarah's ring where it still hung around his neck, but the gesture had evolved from desperate clinging to grateful remembrance. His late wife's influence lived on in the values he brought to his work and the love he showed Noah, but her memory no longer prevented him from embracing new possibilities for connection and service. As he prepared for bed, Derek reflected on the unexpected trajectory that had brought him from Uber driving and warehouse work to municipal policy development and community leadership. The path had included betrayal and forgiveness, professional growth and personal complexity, the discovery that authentic relationships could survive imperfect origins if tended with consistent care and honest communication. Noah was already asleep, his room decorated with photos from community events, school achievements, and the ongoing documentation of his friendship with Emma. Derek paused in the doorway, watching his son's peaceful sleep and feeling deep gratitude for the resilience that had carried them both through loss and change towards stability and purpose. The apartment that had once felt temporary now served as their permanent base, but it no longer represented limitation or struggle. Instead, it had become the foundation from which Derek engaged in work that reflected his deepest values while providing Noah with the security and community connection that every child deserved. Tomorrow would bring new families to serve, new challenges to navigate, and new opportunities to demonstrate that authentic community engagement could thrive within institutional frameworks if guided by principles of respect, partnership, and genuine care for human dignity. The last thing Derek saw before sleep was Emma's drawing from that pivotal day at the community celebration, now framed and hanging beside his bed, four stick figures, holding hands beneath a bright sun, with the caption, "Our Family," written in a child's careful handwriting. The image represented not just the relationships that had survived corporate manipulation and adult complications, but the broader truth that families could be formed through choice and commitment rather than just biology or legal arrangements. Derek's story had begun with $5 given in generosity and received in manipulation, but it had evolved into something larger and more meaningful, a reminder that authentic human connection could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, that professional fulfillment was possible when work aligned with values, and that the most important legacy anyone could leave was the ripple effect of genuine care extended to others in their moments of need. In the morning, Derek would wake to another day of community advocacy, collaborative parenting, and the ongoing work of building relationships based on mutual respect rather than strategic advantage. But tonight, he slept with the deep contentment that came from knowing his life reflected his values, his work served others' genuine needs, and his love for Noah was expressed through both daily care and the larger commitment to creating a world where all children could thrive. The $5 bill that had started everything was long gone, spent on a child's meal in a moment of spontaneous generosity. But its impact continued to multiply through every family. Derek helped navigate crisis, every program that prioritized dignity over efficiency, every relationship that proved authentic connection could survive even the revelation of its manipulated origins. Derek Cole had learned that sometimes the most profound changes began with the simplest acts of human kindness, that love could grow from imperfect soil if tended with honesty and patience, and that the truest measure of success was not what you achieved for yourself, but what you made possible for others who were still fighting their way towards stability and hope.